Welcome back to what I have chosen to call a history of rock and roll in film and rock and roll. You may call it what you like. Today we continue and conclude observations on the Go-Go's, but we will also be including details about Valley Girl, the original film, with a couple of asides to the remake, and the children's rock and roll cartoon show, fashion show, merchandising extravaganza of the mid-'80s that was Jem and the Holograms. So it's a great, big, whipped up, massive overlap of so many different stories today, and they're going to interlock and interweave in ways that might seem random to you. And that is because you don't give me nearly enough credit for how much thought I put into every single thing I do when it applies to editing these episodes. I tell you, such disrespect, such a lack of regard for my considerable talents and skills and work ethic things. I do forgive you because I have to. I just can't stay mad at you. But this will be one of the more interweaving, intricately webby, spider-woven type episodes when it comes to the narrative bouncing all over the place. So I hope you're up for it. I hope you're ready. I hope you're having a good day. Are you having a good day? Actually, I hope you're not. I hope this cheers you up so I get the moral and spiritual credibility somehow, whatever bank that they keep that in, whatever cosmic sort of ledger is being kept, that I did something that made you feel good on a bad day. So start with a bad day. Turn this off if you're feeling good. Go find a bad day, and in the middle of that, put this on, and then make sure to do the appropriate cosmic tally or spiritual ledger updates to record with the voices of the universe so I get those cosmic credits. Don't let me down, people. I want to read a quick 2 pages from Belinda Carlisle's book before we get into Jem and the Holograms. This is 2003, after God Bless the Go-Go's came out, and they are on tour with Green Day. For a month, I guess. She says it begins at the end of July in Redding, California, and she gets into that place she gets into only when she's on the road, where she can drink and use drugs and isolate herself from the responsibilities and concerns of real life, including a drug dealer she ran into in Belgium that is extorting money from her, or trying to extort money from her. He's got her contact information because she bought drugs from him in Belgium. He knows who she is. He knows she's got a family now and has a lot to lose from him going public. But this little month with Green Day is a bright spot. They get to play a big summer festival in Tokyo. She's boozing, using heavily, and Billy Joe from Green Day had co-written one of the new songs on God Bless the Go-Go's called Unforgiven. And they rolled out the red carpet for the Go-Go's, literally. Had one on the side of the stage that takes you straight into a little tent full of booze and beer with a sign saying Go-Go's only, like a little fort. She says the Green Day guys had them over to their hotel several times for champagne and caviar. We ended our nights drinking at 2 or 3 in the morning. One night they took us to the hippest rock and roll bar in Osaka, and I ended up dancing on top of the bar to Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. Green Day played that song the next night, dedicated it to her. How sweet is that? Okay, moving on to the next segment.
Hey, let's talk Britta Phillips and Jem and the Holograms. I know I mentioned a couple things in the previous episode about that whole part of her career. I know I was reading from an article from Birth Movies Death about Satisfaction, and I know it mentioned this. I don't remember if I quoted it, that Britta Phillips was in the Jem and the Holograms live-action movie that came out a few years ago that nobody liked. And she made a cameo in it. What I'm seeing as I do more research is that Samantha Newark, who was the speaking voiceover artist on Jem and the Holograms cartoon, made an appearance in the film, not Britta Phillips. There's a great Vulture article from 2014, so right when the movies was announced to be in, I guess, some sort of production state, that has a really cool interview with her. I'll include that. I'll include some great YouTube videos I saw about Gem and the Holograms and its creation, and sort of a breakdown of the history or review of it. There's two that are great for totally different reasons, and one that's an interview with the creator of Gem and the Holograms, who, it turns out, was a Marvel Studios, writer on multiple successful cartoons before Gem. It was definitely, her sort of quest to get this thing done, to make this a reality. Her name is Christy Marx, so she had done G.I. Joe, Transformers, and some Marvel properties on cartoons, writing as a writer. She'd been in the writer's room for some of this kind of stuff that was happening in the action figure era boom of the early 80s, when they were just cranking out as many action-oriented cartoons for boys as they could. And it seems like she, realized there was a market out there that was being neglected, which was, young girls to have a superhero they could get behind. In this case, one that's got ongoing sort of, superhero secret identity drama with a boyfriend or a love life, and with a business she's running and a band. And, so there's lots of stuff that sells toys, lots of stuff that young girls would like as far as, different costumes and, bright colors for the 80s and stuff, and lots of friendship with other girls, but also adventure and lots of attempted murder, it looks like. So this is some quotes from Britta Phillips herself talking about Gem and the Holograms, because she was the singing voice only, so she did a ton of recordings for the show. It looks like there was about 65 episodes, and for those episodes, when you put together like all the songs they recorded, there's like 180 of them or something. If I know they didn't get to enough episodes to technically qualify for what usually was the syndication standard of 100 episodes, so you could, so you wouldn't run out of episodes if you're rerunning them on another network, 5 days a week. But from what I'm seeing, Gem did go into syndication, so hopefully Britta Phillips got a nice piece of that for royalties for singing all those songs. Not that she was going to get publishing, which is a lot more money. But it's funny, as I read this Vulture article, they start with like, how do you feel about the G.I. Joe director doing a Gem movie? Because I forget if he did both of the G.I. Joe movies or just I think it was just Retaliation, which I don't think is as fun. I mean, neither one of those movies are very G.I. Joe, quite frankly. And I'm not a G.I. Joe purist. I wasn't in love with that cartoon as much as I was the Transmorphers. Except for the fact that Scarlet from G.I. Joe sort of awakened my budding, youthful, sexual, instincts, I guess I would say. Because whenever she was doing like these high kicks and like taking dudes out, I started to feel funny. I was like 8 or 9 years old, I think, at the time. It's like, what is it about women's legs that I like to stare at when they're like that, even if they're cartoons? I don't know. Maybe I'll figure it out someday. And it only took another 20 years. Anyhow, Britta says at the time that she got the gig, she had just moved to New York. Singing was what she wanted to do for a living. Her dad was a session player, so that helps. He found out they were looking for a young rock singer type voice, and he gave the people, I guess, at Sunbow Productions the demo. She goes into audition, and they used the audition recording as the theme song track. So even though she said she wanted to do it again, she thought, oh, no, let me do it for real. But nope. They had other things on their minds, I guess. They had to get this thing going because she was going to have to start recording songs for them every couple of weeks. They tell me what the episode was about, and I'd get into character, she says. They made me sing incredibly high. They ask her, why did they end up switching the original Truly Outrageous theme, the opening credits theme, to Gem Girls, which is not as good. I think I barely remember that, but she goes, I know, that sounded more like a jingle to me than an actual song. Some of the songs on the show are complex, so I didn't really like the new theme song either. Maybe it was easier for little girls to sing that one. I don't know. The interviewer mentions that the Misfits aren't featured, the evil girl band that are always the opposition to Gem and the Holograms. They're not featured in the second title sequence song, and that sucks. And Britta concedes that everyone likes them. They talk about how they were criminals, like fun criminals, but totally criminals. They mentioned that in the first episode, they run Jerrica off the road and almost off of a cliff. Jerrica is the Clark Kent to Gem as her Superman. She talks about going to conventions, I guess. She said, I went to Gem Con a couple years ago. I definitely was not going to sing anything there. But once I got there and had a couple of drinks, I mean, everyone was so excited about the idea that I just got swept away by it and wound up singing. I sang She's Got the Power, I think, Like a Dream. Those are pretty good. The interviewer mentions Gem's story is pretty fraught. She runs a foster home and a record label, has a secret identity, and music rivals are constantly trying to literally kill her band. Britta goes, it was crazy. I was 20 at the time, and I remember thinking, this is for kids? I was surprised they were putting in stuff like the boyfriend dating both Jerrica and Gem, and Jerrica getting jealous of herself. It's really funny. So I think this is all, probably part of Christy Marx's design. Like, quit playing it nice with the girl stuff. Let's have high stakes. Let's have real danger. There's a couple of little clips and montages in one of the videos I included of just, all these incredibly obvious and incredibly loud, violent murder attempts by the Misfits and their manager to completely wipe Gem and the Holograms off the face of the earth, just to splatter them all over the stage whenever possible. It's from the I think it's Beyond Pictures or B-Mask is the one, the channel I'm trying to think of. There we go.
Well, so this is the Memphis Horns usually plays that part, right? I love the late 80s mentality. Let's just replace the Memphis Horns with one Jackson guitar with a chorus pedal, a Boss chorus pedal.
Were there still all USA Jacksons at that time?
And the Squire fenders were still made in Japan. And Britta's got a fucking matching black headstock on her guitar. What a bunch of nonsense.
Now, a couple notes from this article about Satisfaction. Britta says it was her first acting audition. She just had to be in a band, I suppose. It was all girl, but we had a male keyboardist. And I wasn't the lead singer, although I do sing in the movie. We all sang. There was no lip syncing. I was excited about it at the time. And then Aaron Spelling got on board and the script changed. It got a little silly. So we all had a good time making it, but we didn't expect too much from it. That's another one that I hear, that when I hear from people that liked it, I go, what? Oh, okay. That's cool. I'm not ashamed. Although sometimes I had to watch with my hands in front of my face. So they ask about Aaron Spelling's involvement, and she says, initially, the part I auditioned for was the druggy guitar player. It was definitely grittier and more serious. Then they decided I was going to be the funny one. So I had to get big and clown it up. It ended up being fun, and I'm not embarrassed by my performance, except for the music. The songs were not great, even though Steve Cropper was the musical director, and he's obviously a legend and a great. It was 1988, and I think he was trying to do something that sounded 80s, and the combo wasn't great. There's one terrible original song, Talk to Me, and the rest were covers. Some of those are okay. I sang Mr. Big Stuff, and we did Iko Iko, and those sounded okay. The fake drums were not okay. Now, one thing I learned about the origins of Gem and the Holograms from a video I'll include in the description from a channel called Toy Galaxy that's really good. Even if you're not, I'm not a toy collector, so I'm not into their content in general, but I've watched their documentary sort of look backs at stuff like Max Headroom and Robotech and Transformers, and I find it all fascinating. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle ones is really good too. Because they get into the business side of things, which is most of what I care about. Like who created this stuff? How did they get the deal made? Who put up the money? Who screwed somebody over? All that stuff. But in this case, in most cases with the cartoons, it's pretty much, it's a excuse to print money in the 80s after all the deregulation.
which because this is why you didn't see this stuff in the 60s and 70s. You couldn't legally, because like I think the Federal Communications Commission had a rule. You couldn't just make a cartoon for children about a product you're trying to sell them until the 80s. That's why these all happened at the same time. They also have a good look back at the history of Saturday morning cartoons as a concept and as a sort of cultural force and why it went away. But the point I was trying to get to is the Toy Galaxy retrospective points out that the actual debut of Gem and the Holograms wasn't on its own half-hour show or half-hour time slot. It would have been like a 22-minute show, I assume. It was part of a Sunday morning concept, like called Super Sunday or something of various names that they kept changing, of a block of Marvel Studios produced cartoons that were sort of an audition to see what would be the most popular and what they should expand into a weekly full half-hour type show. So they would run like 7 minutes of an episode instead of the full episode of things like Gem and the Holograms, Inhumanoids, which I don't think I ever saw, but I remember commercials for, Robotics with an X at the end, which was like it looks like a total cash grab on trying to get in on Transformers, but I think it was the difference was like people could be inside the robotics, transforming robot things with, giant lizard heads. I mean, they were robot heads, but some of them look like lizard alligator-y heads, and they had, I don't get what the deal was with those. But it was definitely cashing in on robot things that fight. And then there's people with little weird futuristic uniforms that are riding around in them or controlling them or something. And then there was Bigfoot and what was it called? The Bigfoot and it was monster trucks. It was a show about people that drove monster trucks that existed in real life. It was a big deal in the 80s for kids. And the Bigfoot was the name of a giant monster truck. They would just smash other things. But it was Bigfoot and the Muscle Machines. And I think it was a definite play towards the more like rural American kiddo, the way that they sang the theme song and the way they dressed the characters and stuff. And I guess they were somehow action heroes that drove these big trucks and got involved with probably races or fights or things with some evil forces that also were riding big trucks around or motorcycles around. I don't remember too much about it. I'm not going to do a deep dive on that right now because the point is Gem and the Holograms is the cartoon that stood out among those four. Definitely had a lot more going for it, Gem and the Holograms, as far as originality and complexity and all the different working parts that went into every episode. It's interesting to sort of revisit. I only had vague memories of it because it was on TV when I was a kid. Wasn't geared towards me because I was not into that kind of girly stuff. But with the exception of maybe their legs. But I was still at that age where seeing people kiss on TV was gross. Gem and the Holograms lasted 3 years on the air, and then Barbie came a-knockin'. The Mattel, Barbie doll had been the dominant force in toy marketing towards girls for like a billion years, and Gem was starting to sort of horn in on that, so Mattel debuted Barbie and the Rockers toy line, which was meant to definitely crush the Gem and the Holograms toys. And I guess they won, and I believe it's Britta Phillips points out that the issue was that the Gem and the Holograms dolls were physically taller and bigger than the Barbie dolls, which means that parents had to decide, okay, if you buy this versus this, the clothes aren't going to be, transferable back and forth for your kids. And that's one of the things that, kids that play with dolls liked doing was just taking outfits from one and using them on the others and crisscrossing and mismatching and coming up with their own sort of little fashion design thing going on there. So it was sort of a no-brainer for parents. Like, no, I'm not going to, because then I have to buy all the stuff. They got to have multiple dolls to be able to play with and swap them around. So they were not down with that.
Some Roadhouse bullshit.
Creator Christy Marx was interviewed in 2004. I know that was quite a while ago, but it's still interesting to me, this little quote where she says, she would like to see a revival or a reboot of some kind of Gem happen, but she says, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but the whole rights situation for Gem is very, very complicated. Believe me, if there were a simple, straightforward way to do it, it would be done. But there are some very big complications that are in the way at the moment. I assume the decision to make a live action movie that bore no resemblance whatsoever to the original property was some sort of a way for someone to retain the rights that didn't want to let them go. That's usually when bad movies get made, or bad movies that are based on an existing intellectual property. And a lot of times studios just do that to hang on to the rights to make more later, even if they don't plan to, or just hold on to the right. Maybe to see if they can sell it for more money later. But if you don't watch any of the footage on those retrospectives I planted in the description of this episode, I do recommend just going to YouTube for a couple of minutes and watching little clips of Gem and the Holograms or one of the music videos or something, just so you can get a feel for how different it was than everything else that was going on at the time on American cartoon television. And how, it seems pretty inventive looking back now. Good for them.
I'll give this movie a lot of credit for not having a drum kit with octagonal toms, pads on it. Yeah, that was a failed fucking attempt at getting some placement here. Mirage synthesizers, no one's ever heard of that. So what I want to know is, was Mirage a placeholder for somebody else they were going to try to get an endorsement from? Or did Mirage actually exist and they got in this film and never went anywhere?
Well, funny you should ask, Drunk Jay from a year and a half ago. Turns out the Mirage was put out by Ensoniq, a company that, while not widely known, did create some of the earliest, most affordable models of sampler synthesizers, introduced in 1984 to start with, at a list price of $1,695, with features that were previously only available on more expensive samplers like the Fairlight CMI. The documentary about Wax Trax Records in Chicago, there's a whole section on just the Fairlight itself, how it changed industrial music forever. And the Mirage is the brainchild of Robert Llanes, who is responsible for the same sound interface device chip that was included in the Commodore 64. Over the course of the mid-'80s to late 80s, there were 4 different versions of the Mirage, and it was used extensively on Janet Jackson's Rhythm Nation 1814 album and the Control album. Also was used by the Bomb Squad on the track Rebel Without a Pause by Public Enemy. So there you go, Jay. You are wrong. You are overconfident and sounding like a fool.
Bateman kind of looks like that freshman chick in PCU.
Who was also in... Oh, God damn.
Don't look so hard.
Stop talking about my dick, Britta.
Challenge!
What a crude joke, Jay Smith, in the past. To clarify, it was meant ironically. I'd say nothing of the sort to Britta. Okay, now, the lady from PCU that my friend Murdoch mentioned is Megan Ward. She did a ton of stuff in the 90s and before and after, but relevant to me, she was the love interest in Encino Man. She was in the movie Freaked. She was in PCU, as mentioned. And then she was in Joe's Apartment, which I think that was a first date movie I took a girlfriend to in high school. I know that's terribly relevant to you all listening. But it's funny looking at her IMDb because she also played the part of Ashley Judd in the TV movie about Naomi and Winona Judd called Love Can Build a Bridge, at a time when I believe Ashley Judd could have easily played herself because Ashley Judd is an actress. But she was also in Party 5 as Jill Holbrook. She was in the Brady Bunch movie as Donna Leonard. She went on to do tons of work. She was in Dark Skies. She was in Melrose Place. A whole lot of one-off stuff that I'm seeing now through the early 2000s. A little bit of NCIS, a little bit of Boston Legal, a little bit of CSI Miami, Seventh Heaven. And then she was in General Hospital as Kate Howard and then as Connie Falconeri. Definitely a face I remember from my teenage years in the mid 90s as someone too adorable to accurately be the girl next door type, but that's always what she was kind of portraying in a lot of those roles. Somewhat plain Jane, but very cute and pretty. The non-threatening kind of attractiveness in those sorts of movies.
I really just want to see the drummer go punch some guy in the balls.
Jumping back now to my observations while watching the Go-Go's Showtime documentary. We're all over the map today. There's another conversation about betrayal coming up. Lo and behold, it's their manager, Ginger. She is still emotional to this day about the fact that after the second Go-Go's album came out and the second Rolling Stone cover and, having done Saturday Night Live and stuff, the girls are being wooed by larger management companies. And they themselves say, I think Ginger understood the fact that we wanted her to keep working with us along with a firm, a larger management group. They could keep things going and go to the next level. And Ginger, in the present day, says the words, my band was being taken away from me. And it was terrible to be in these meetings with these other managers saying, Ginger, we know you know how to take a band from A to B, and you've done a great job. But with our resources, we can take a band from B all the way to Z. And she takes this personally. It's the truth. That's what those big companies do. And that's what a band at this juncture in their career needs if they're going to keep going. This is the early 80s MTV era, and there are a group of young women that are captivating people all over the country. If it stops here, they go away. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. You don't just get to book these tours and then decide, okay, these large venues are as big as we want to get. We don't want to get richer or famous or for the most, unless you're Pearl Jam and it's 1994 and you have all that control. Also, you're men, so it's different. And it's not the early 80s. It's not the mid 80s like it is. This is crucial. They're only going to get so much of a window to work within the business. As soon as you stop making connections and stop growing relationships within the business, there's a timer running out on you because the people that you've established relationships with are going to die, retire, turn on you, or screw you over. And you need to keep outgrowing certain elements of the business. Obviously, I never did that. I'm not trying to say I know how to do these things firsthand, but this is what I've observed. At that time in pop music in America, if you're a rock band especially. Now, they're also, because they're women, there's more people just waiting to write them off and say, oh, look, they're just a one-trick pony anyway. Oh, they can't make it to the big time. And they've only got so much time to make their money. Damn it. They need to get some money in the bank, and they need to get publishing out there, and they need to get deals made. They need to get these songs, into songbooks and into karaoke rotation and on the radio and all these things that are going to pay for their kids to go to college someday, for crying out loud. If you want to be a rock star and you want to make it successfully and sustain it, these are the things you have to have people looking out for you. Metallica never would have gone half the places they went. They wouldn't have gone 75% of the places they went if it wasn't for the management team that they got after the deal with Metal Blade Records, when they got into Music for Nations and then eventually Elektra Records with Peter Mensch, the other manager. The two big managers, they had been proven success makers with other rock bands, but no one as heavy as Metallica. And like it or not, that's just what got them where that's what got them past the hurdles that other bands did make it. I mean, an example is lots of the big four thrash bands. I know I keep going back to them. If you've listened to a lot of my episodes, they're my main reference point, I guess. Metallica and the big four thrash bands, because it's an interesting tale of success or not. And they all did things a little differently, and some of them were more successful at it than others. But, the Clash of the Titans tour in 1991 was the peak of thrash metal before things started to drift away from them attention-wise, unless they changed their sound enough to stay on some part of, Headbangers Ball in MTV and, maybe on some radio in some parts of the country. Megadeth and Metallica did that successfully. Slayer and Anthrax didn't do that successfully, although I would rather listen to... All right, that's another tangent. Forget it. I'm shutting up. But, I mean, the whole kicking people out of your band conversation with Go-Go's reminds me of Dave Mustaine, too. It's that whole, well, why didn't I get a second chance, Well, because people like you can't have second chances, Dave. People like you didn't work out personality-wise with the rest of Metallica. They can't have three leaders. There's James, and there's Lars, and there's you, and then there's Cliff. And they need somebody quiet who isn't going to be as much of a problem, like Kirk Hammett. So that was coming to mind when I was hearing, about the drummer having to be let go first, and then the bassist having to be let go. Other things I wanted to point out after getting this deep into the documentary, Charlotte is clearly influenced by surf guitar playing. Like a good example is her parts on This Town, unless Jane's writing some of these parts too. But on the old footage, when there's a surf guitar kind of part with a melody line climbing up and down a scale, it seems to be Charlotte playing it, or the camera's on Charlotte, or it's cropped so that you see Charlotte playing it, and thus, giving the impression to the viewer that Jane's the one that kind of strums the chords for the most part. And when there's a melody or there's a walk around kind of walking or arpeggiated part, it's Charlotte doing it. I get the impression that Jane's more of a punk rock guitarist anyway. She's usually, picking on power chords or strumming open chords, and she has kind of a limited range when it comes to things like playing scales. Turns out Charlotte, who has come across so far as like the good one, not that they're bad, but probably the more mild-mannered of the group, it seems like to me. She's been out scoring heroin when she's not hanging around the girls. And, it's Gina, the drummer, who starts to recognize Charlotte's fucked up. And it's Margot, who's obviously not in the band at this point anymore, but is used to squatting around certain burned out areas, homeless areas of LA. Margot's the one that sees Charlotte walking in the direction of the part of town where people go to score. Anyway, it's not until, the band gets into, I'm backtracking a little bit timeline-wise. It's not until they get into the studio to make their first record with IRS Records. And, IRS Records, that's run by Stuart Copeland of the Police's brother or cousin, Miles Copeland. I believe it's a brother. And he likes what they're doing. He sees the point in it. He sees that they've been rejected by all the major labels at this point because they don't want to put out an all-girl band. And he gets them a producer that slows them down a bit, gets them into a groove, and gets them into the feel of like, where do these songs sit? Where do the melodies really breathe better at? What tempo? And as one of the gals says, it wasn't until we slowed the songs down that much that we realized we had a bunch of pop songs on our hands that we had written. Now, it's when that first album comes out, they have the photo shoot for the cover, Beauty and the Beat, and they're all wearing towels and then a towel on their head and then the face mask, like, the face cream thing. That was Belinda's idea, she says. And it was sort of an idea to keep things kind of, not trendy, kind of timeless in her words, but also they're incognito. They're not, it's a very unifying sort of image, I think, and works really well. Ginger has the brilliant idea to get the towels by going to Macy's and buying them and returning them the day after. Because she can't afford those. It's like they were really nice, like Macy's big fluffy towels, and there's no way in hell that the band budget at the time was going to be able to afford that. So then they go do a video shoot for Our Lips Are Sealed. The video only costs $6,000. Not that they had $6,000, but the police did, and they didn't know it. Miles Copeland had skimmed $6,000 off of, I guess, some video budget for the police, and didn't tell anybody about it. Community chest. It goes to the girls, and they just drive around in a convertible all afternoon in the sun, acting like the Go-Go's. And they honestly feel like it's a huge waste of time. They have no idea what they're doing this for, and they think the only good outcome from this whole experience could be if they can get arrested. And then it'll be on film, and it'll be in the video for posterity. So that's why there's so many shots of them in this fountain in Beverly Hills by the end of the song. And like they just keep rolling around and getting more and more messed up. Because they're trying to get arrested and no one's calling the cops. And so they stay in the fountain. So they roll around some more and they get even wackier and sillier, like they didn't just like jump out of the car and jump in the water and go, and for like a couple minutes and they weren't just that silly that was like desperation silliness. But, the only other thing I was going to say from there is, then that was doing so well that Miles Copeland is like, hey, should I put them on tour with the Police, maybe the biggest band in the universe right now? And it seems like that was agreed upon by everyone, that it would be a good idea, a very good idea, and it worked. So the video on MTV opened for the Police, huge stardom coming their way. They're selling a bunch more records. They get the opportunity to go on Saturday Night Live after that. They get to, and parlay that success into making the second record. And it's kind of all everything's history from there. How did I screw up that phrase? The rest, as they say, is history. I mean, that's what they needed. That was the springboard they needed. So then they get so big that they got to get bigger management, and Ginger's sad, and Ginger feels like she got stabbed in the back, apparently, because she's, I would say, a very selfish person that doesn't recognize that, like, you've built all this for this artist. You need to get out of the way or work with someone else to keep it going and keep the checks coming in, because there's things you can't do as one person that a group of people with experience and connections can do. That's how everything works in entertainment. You can have the best product and the best songs. That's fine. You could self-finance it. It could sound just as professional as everything else on the radio, but someone has to pay to put it on the radio. Someone has to get you. Now, MTV's a little different because MTV needed bands with videos. There was so few bands that had them. So they play the same Rod Stewart video like 10 times a day or whatever the hell it was in like the first month. And that's how a lot of those cheap, cheesy videos got on the air, because they were created by new wave acts that didn't have money, but they had enough creativity to like edit something together, however ridiculous, that was effective enough to leave an impression in your mind about that artist or that band.
I love the Yamaha DX9 pads, like. Hot potato. Oh, this is fucking great. Fuck yeah. Mr. Fuji, fucking sand in the eyes, love it. And the Huey Lewis like snare drum sound on the butt pad.
I don't know. I don't know what I meant by that. I don't know what Huey Lewis snare drum sound on the butt pads means, and I wonder if I'm referring to the Huey Lewis snare drum pad sound from Working for a Living. Got. Good stuff. Check it out.
This is clearly a vehicle for Britta. Like, this is supposed to launch her into something else.
How'd it go?
Like that.
She largely became a voice actress.
Right.
You know,
But
she always passes out when she does that song. She thinks it's the only way to do it right.
One of the interesting things about the dynamic with Charlotte in the band is, besides her being sort of a more accomplished musician from her background, and also that she's the drug user and a little more of a loner, she's also the one responsible for most of the songwriting at this point as far as publishing money goes. So people like in the band like Gina and Belinda, they're not seeing that money. They don't have as many writing credits as she does. And that breeds resentment. Belinda, for her part, says she felt she had no right to bring that up or argue about it because she was such a fuck up anyway. Gina definitely took offense, definitely didn't like the discrepancy in the lifestyle going on, the money coming in, because she saw a check for Charlotte in their management's office and compared it to the numbers on her own check and had to have that explained to her as to why she's not getting those checks. It's interesting because early on in the doc, when they bring up, Charlotte's drug use, they, as I mentioned, like Gina's the one that's like telling the other girls, like, look at her eyes, they're pinned, she's on heroin. And then they cut to a little MTV spot where it's Charlotte and Kathy, and they're just trying to figure out how they're going to say this thing they're being asked to say, as if this is supposed to be okay, now we're going to cut to her being fucked up, bit. So I don't know if there should have been a different transition there, or like more than no transition, or they just screwed up the editing or what, because it really doesn't show her being a fuck up. She's like, they're like, what do you want to say? So should we say, hi, we're Charlotte and Kathy together, and then okay, yeah, let's do it. Okay, in 3, 2, and then both girls like perk up and in unison say, hi, we're Charlotte and Kathy from the Go-Go's, and you can now watch MTV 24 hours a day on Channel 62 in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, or whatever the town is, just like, perfect. It's so impressive. I couldn't do that with my friends sober right now at my age, let alone when I'm in my early 20s and fucked up. It was great. But it also brings to mind, when they're talking about this rift between her and the band or other band members and each other, Belinda in her book, I think, does a great job in explaining how her family dynamic affected her dynamic in the band, and how all the girls in the band were not even, I wouldn't say hesitant, but they were internally just rejecting the idea, pushing down the idea of ever ratting on each other, ever accusing each other of anything, bringing up anything you don't like, because they had to be a unit. And they, and in large part, they too had family dynamics they came from where things like that weren't acceptable. It was not acceptable to speak up for yourself. It's not acceptable to, speak against a member of your family and to appear as though things aren't harmonious, even though people are just screaming inside and they're unhappy. Very, very, I don't know, all that seems very poignant, like to be able to look back at that and write that in your book, and then have other people like me and your fans and younger people that are slowly maybe becoming fans of yours evaluate that while watching this documentary, thinking about bands that you've been in and the people that have had certain baggage from their families or power dynamics that they've come from, and how that affects how you treat your band members. Really interesting, fascinating. This is probably, I think, some of the most fascinating stuff when it comes to all this history of rock and roll. The difference in stories between solo artists and bands that had to keep it all together, Oh, and they're not doing any favors to the gals in present day, may I say, with the high def. There's ways to shoot this and light this, so we're not seeing every crack in someone's face, even though they're heavily, heavily made up. There's still a little. God, it's so annoying. It's so annoying because they want to look good on this, probably the last thing they're going to get filmed for, and asked about, and it drives me nuts. It drives me bonkers. I saw this in the worst example I've ever seen is Never Sleep Again, the Nightmare on Elm Street documentary. It came out on Netflix like 7 years ago. Oh, the lighting was terrible. It's so unflattering. Someone driving by on a motorcycle agrees with me, obviously. Anyhow. Jumping back around to Satisfaction, the movie from 1988, I found a New York Times review. Looks like February 13th of 88. I mean, this was released. I mean, if that date is correct, then this was released in the middle of Screw You and Screw Your Movie season. We don't care if you do well, because it's not Christmas and it's not summertime. So the reviewer, I'll put a link into the description if you want to read the whole thing, but reviewer points out the members of this tough, cruel group might have been raised in Beverly Hills. Well, yeah, I think some of them were, or pretty close to it. As Jenny Lee, Ms. Bateman's singing is so distant from any human voice that the sound engineers must have been the busiest people on the film. And even though the band never plays one song from the 1980s except a hokey ballad about leaves talking to trees written for the movie, they get a summer-long gig at a beach resort. There, they meet law students in Madras pants, whose nerdy sense of fashion is not meant to extend to their taste in music, but I wonder. They do like it when the band sings, with all the energy of sleepwalkers, Mr. Big Stuff / Who Do You Think You Are? Jenny Lee has a fling with a depressed older songwriter who perks up long enough to write the hokey ballad. I would say all relevant points, even though I still like this film. The reviewer also says there's nothing wrong with the acting that better material, preferably non-musical, wouldn't solve. Ms. Bateman's has apparently wanted a change from playing the bubble-headed Mallory Keaton on television's Family Ties, so here is Jenny proving she's smart, giving her high school valedictory speech. We can make the kind of noise that's going to wake the world from its stagnant slumber. The class cheers. So guys, Satisfaction is a typical low-budget summer movie where everyone has a hot romance, a good body, and an expensive haircut. The mystery, which is a pun because the band's name is Mystery, is why it opened yesterday at the Criterion and other theaters. My guess is that it will appear some summer evening on television. It happens to be an NBC production, and NBC is the network of Family Ties. So there we go. That does that does tie in with what happens later. It was obviously released as Girls of Summer in 1991-ish after Julia Roberts got famous. If you were to watch Satisfaction and predict which of the two women would be the more famous, I would say probably Mallory from Family Ties, because at least she, the character had more going for it, and you kind of wanted to like her. It wouldn't be Julia Roberts because she's kind of middle of the road. She sort of secretly wants to be a homebody and have a family and not miss out on that safety net. But, you know, if you were to pick anyone in the band as portrayed on screen, you would undoubtedly pick Britta Phillips. I mean, she's clearly the star of those, you know, of everyone in the band. I'll just say that. Britta Phillips, clearly the star, clearly has all the charisma and the singing voice, and was sidelined and became a cartoon character voice who would then just sort of direct their own recording career and not get any more shots at acting. Maybe she didn't pursue them aggressively. I don't know, but I think she could have been the next E.G. Daily. Tune in to half of my episodes to find out more about E.G. Daily. No, Britta Phillips did just fine in showbiz as she did. I would be happy to have had that kind of a career. Same with E.G. Daily. Seems like they got to work plenty and establish quite a resume, especially compared to a Justine Bateman and any other members of the band except for Julia Roberts. Think of her what you will. I don't know. But I do think, for the most part, her character, Julia Roberts' character in Satisfaction, does foreshadow a lot of the characters she would play in other movies later. Just, you know, the slightly older version of the concerned, stalwart, middle-of-the-road personality, you know, except for, obviously, the breakout being Pretty Woman. But still, that character from Pretty Woman could easily be a family character too. And pretty soon she'd be playing like frustrated stepmoms in a family drama / mild comedy / grandma's dying of cancer movies. Now, for the third album, I think that's Talk Show, there is sort of a writer's block happening with Charlotte, and she's not coming up with as much material. Well, this is Jane's chance to step forward and contribute a lot more writing that gets through. It's no one in the band's favorite album. It's no one in the band's favorite experience. And that's nothing to do with Jane. It's just their dynamic as people and as a band that's been around this long. It is now the cracks are showing. Now the dysfunction's really kicking in because people have been hiding their feelings for too long. And now I think there's a little more of an element of potential, backstabbery coming out as they're doing more press and they are being, set up for this big tour. It's funny. There's interview footage of someone asking them, so what sort of sponsorship are you considering for the tour? What a terrible on rock and roll question that is. And I didn't really know that a lot of artists had control over that in their position at that time in the 80s. That you could just, we want to get sponsored by Pepsi, so we're going to do that. I think your management tells you who sponsored the tour at that point. But apparently, I don't know. Apparently, this interviewer thinks differently, and maybe they are right. But the weird twist business-wise around this time is that the management tells Jane and everybody, but it's mostly pertinent to Jane, that they need to start splitting publishing money equally among the 5 of them if they're going to keep going. Jane says absolutely not, which I can't blame her, because she is the one that stepped up to the plate on this third record and filled in the gaps with the writing. And Belinda and Gina, by comparison, didn't have what it takes to come to the rescue of the band with more writing. And now Jane has to be the one that's going to get sacrificed when it comes to, this is going to be a big payday for her finally. But as far as being pragmatic about the future of a band and a relationship, I understand that method. I understand that mentality business-wise. And it's well laid out in an interview with Joe Rogan by Billy Corgan. And I don't love Joe Rogan as a general rule because I have issues with his tendency towards a lot of medical disinformation and stupid whack job crackpot guests. Whatever, free country, freedom of speech, I'm all about it. The answer to that kind of speech, I believe, is more speech to combat it. And that's why I listen to a podcast called Decoding the Gurus, which I highly recommend if you are like me and you used to listen to certain public intellectuals that seemed pretty smart for a while before, I don't know, the last 5 years when they all lost their goddamn minds and went deep into political grifting. Apologize for that aside, but point is, I can't just recommend Joe Rogan without qualifying what I'm saying. I tend to enjoy his interviews with musicians that the musicians I already like. And in the case of Billy Corgan, I don't like it. I don't like his music, but I enjoy his interviews. And he talks about how his management, when Smashing Pumpkins were getting big, they came to him and they're like, look, split the publishing with the band members, give them each like 20%, and you keep, you still keep the majority, but of what you write. And he's like, why would I do that? Why? They're not writing the songs. I'm writing the songs. They're my songs. And they're like, yeah, but it's going to get bad. It's going to get really nasty when you guys start getting big. You're going to get rich, and they're not. And he didn't get it. Like, he did not. He says now he understands exactly why they were telling him this. But at the time, it seemed so unfair. And both sides of that, I think, are totally understandable. But, oof, it's just, it was enough to make Jane tell everyone she was going to quit the band. And then they went on tour together because she couldn't leave yet. But she's like, for the next album, yes, let's split it all. And they were like, no, you have to do it now. So clearly the management saw that had a vote of no confidence for the writing and where it was going. And they didn't think that maybe they didn't even intend on having the girls make another record by that point. That's kind of I think that's kind of a tell, you know.
Great Justine Bateman moment. Great Liam Neeson moment. Coming back out from underneath the boat. Holy shit.
Some kind of Abbott and Costello
She was, yes. She hates the water. Oh, God damn it. Get it, yes, get you a piece of that, Liam Neeson.
Sorry, this is back when cinema was good.
Oh my god!
Yes! The classic near toss.
With his shirt on.
Oh yes, oh yes.
She's poo bearing it.
Oh yes.
He,
she's poo-
wait, he did just say seamanship.
She's poo bearing in his seamanship.
That'll work.
I mean, who hasn't worn a man's shirt and been like,
Hi.
Glug, glug, glug.
So tell me about school.
Can you smell how horny I
What are you
am?
going to study?
I always can. What are you talking? Oh, you mean the movie? Sorry. Nice Land's End fucking shirt, you douchebag.
Bob Eldon. He's a friend of mine. He's getting a European tour together.
Catalog boy.
Club, but I know he's
It's
still
hard to
looking for a
imagine him
good
as an
guy.
action star in this, isn't it?
No, it's fine. No, actually, I think he's great. I can imagine him in this film. I can imagine him doing whatever he wants after this. Quite frankly,
Yeah.
I hate that he was Qui-Gon Jinn in that fucking shitty Star Wars series.
He's a more believable action.
Yeah.
Think about it. Just think about it.
No, he's got the projection and hate the fucking
Whatever
soundtrack.
happened to Justine Bateman is what I
It's getting weird.
She probably had a great family and did fine.
There's a room at the top
looks like a
stairs
witch.
to change.
I believe that is my friend William of the Adarna. If you want to look him up and send him hate mail saying that Justine Bateman looks like a witch now. Very mean.
Well, that sounds incredibly sexy, William. I don't know what your definition of ugly is, but
And that was me heroically sticking up for my girl, Justine Bateman. Someone please tell her that I was very brave and risked destroying an important friendship for her honor. So I got notes about the Behind the Music episode for the Go-Go's. After I watched the Showtime doc, which I don't know if I've clarified, is a 2-disc set with one feature on it and no special features whatsoever. Just a DVD and a Blu-ray with, an hour and a half or whatever the heck it is of their story. I went back and watched the Behind the Music that premiered in the early 2000s. There's a lot about Behind the Music that, of course, is trashy. I mean, in general, but it was professionally trashy and self-serving because VH1 had started its own record label at that time and was actually getting a piece of these renewed, band reunions that it was plugging with these specials. I mean, if you're Ozzy Osbourne or you're Red Hot Chili Peppers in 1999, you get a Behind the Music because, you've just had, a big kind of songwriting comeback, or maybe you got back with some band members or something and you were putting out an album that was, going to be promoted on radio or an MTV or whatever the hell. You don't need VH1's help doing that. So you were kind of doing VH1 a favor by having these interviews and stuff, but it still benefited the band. I think with the Go-Go's and a few other bands from the 80s, the Behind the Music era was kind of pivotal in them getting people to, open their weekly paper and see if that summer this newly reformed band they used to like is coming to their town. Also, is it time to go to Circuit City and purchase a compact disc of their new record album? So, notes I wrote down while watching Behind the Music. The voiceover makes things sound very different from what the documentary would have you think, the Showtime documentary. Because it's, the voiceover character in the Behind the Musics, they're always very, not they. He, if that person identifies as he, is always very dramatic, and the writing is sometimes awful. But it accelerates the conflict a lot. But this video also leans more heavily on Charlotte because of the drug thing. So you hear less from certain band members compared to the Showtime doc. And personally, I think this is because they always highlighted the drug stuff and the recovery stuff in Behind the Musics. And that was important. And because VH1 had control over the edit, they could do that. I think the Showtime project, the band probably had more input on. And they wanted to tell everyone's story equally. So also, the manager issue is portrayed differently, as if they were laughing at her and degrading her, Ginger. And then she stopped showing up in this version of the story. Unlike the story in the Showtime documentary where they made the choice and then were disappointed with new management. Then, Jane's comments about going through the motions on stage and resenting their audience are very telling. In the Showtime documentary, she talks about we had a thing called Robo-A-Go-Go, in this little anecdote, like, oh, it's time to go through the motions like robots and just sort of be happy and pretend to be happy and pretend, it's all cool that we're there, and that we're getting along. And maybe they learned from the Behind the Music to address it that way. Because it makes them sound like victims. They're like, oh, we were forced to pretend to go on autopilot instead of being a cool rock and roll band, right? We used to be punk, but now we're just going through the motions to act out this, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm putting words in their mouth. Like this happy mall persona, which is what had been cultivated by their major label and that they had cashed in their chips for. That was their decision. Then in the Behind the Music, it comes across as outright resentment and looking down on those people. Albeit, I think from an apologetic place on Jane's behalf that was edited out for time. They don't leave that stuff in. They don't leave in the qualifying parts where the artist goes, oh man, it sounds terrible to say now, but everything that's where you cut when you're editing a Behind the Music. You cut right after the word, I don't feel this way anymore. I feel bad about it. I feel guilty about it. But bing, then you print the part where they go, we were fucking and sucking and fucking just punching cops and taking no prisoners, and it was never going to end. I said, I don't care how many drugs I do, and I'm going to cut off my mom's head. That's the part that they use. So anyway, Jane says, who needs it? Not another show for another 10,000 geeky fans. I can't wait to get this over with and get laid and get drunk. And Jane calls this totally not being in the moment, speaking for the whole band. If that was what someone just said, if someone had just said that to me in an interview, I'd be like, fuck you so much. But I'm sure that's not the way it was supposed to come across. But still, this version did reinforce my feeling that Jane's right for not wanting to split publishing at the point that she was forced to. Gina, in this series of interviews for Behind the Music, straight up says anybody could have written any song they wanted. If it wouldn't have been the Go-Go's, nobody would have made a dime. Which flies in the face of everything the business of music has set up as a business model. I'm sorry, but you're a drummer that can be replaced. Jane's right for saying, let's split it all up on the next album because fuck you, bring some songwriting, you burden. She didn't say that. I said, because fuck you, you burden. I think that's such a shitty thing for Gina to say, especially at the point where in the early 2000s, she was actually getting music writing gigs of her own finally. Like she was getting publishing deals for other artists that she was writing for, and the idea that it could have been anybody, it's only because it's the Go-Go's that those songs were selling. Like, God, after it was established by Belinda's sort of character and delivery and Charlotte's songwriting, yeah, for sure. But you don't, like, look, if that's the case, why didn't you sell the same amount of albums every single time you put out an album? Whose fault is that? It's because the songwriting didn't connect with people. And personally, this is one of those bands where like they show them later on, like collaborating on a song and someone saying, I think, I love this because it's about women and what they go through, and it's about being, more mature and our age. This is like sort of the chitter chatter you hear on the Showtime documentary when they're all kind of sitting around workshopping one of Jane's songs and stuff. And it's not. I don't know. For a diehard Go-Go's fan, I'm sure it's great. I'm sure it's killer, and I'm not gonna crap on anyone that loves anything. I love you so much for loving the music that you love. If you love the Go-Go's reunion album better than anything they've ever done, I want to dance in that sunshine for all eternity. But I can't. Like, obviously, the way you live, there's some sort of a rainbow around you at all times, if that's how you feel about this band or a lot of bands. But I don't get it. But the thing is, you were a spunky punk group that was half in tatters and totally reckless early on. Then you were a very refined pop music rock and roll machine that still could, party and be outrageous and kick some ass, while being acceptable to the mall crowd. And it worked really, really well. But then to it's time for us to be singer-songwriters now that we're older. Okay, cool. If that's what works for your audience, if they aged with you, great. But I think my suspicion is a lot of your audience at that time looks back on it as fun, spunky mall time. Being young and feelings and boys and, going out and having a good time with your girlfriends and stuff. And those are your, fun, silly, spunky anthems. But they had good songwriting underneath the fun times too. It just wasn't meant to be something that was going to really make you think about what it's like to start going through menopause someday. I hope no one's offended by that. I'm just speculating, and I've absorbed a lot of information about the Go-Go's in a short amount of time.
This is terrible.
I just want you to know I'm not coming at this from a sexist viewpoint. There's a billion times more guy bands that had no right to get back together and try to entertain any of us. Fuck them. Fuck 98% of those bands. All right? That's all. Because you know what? We hear those bands that remind us of when we were teenagers. Because it was energetic music for working out or wanting to fight or convincing me to not fight so I could just get my energy out listening to this angry band. I don't want to hear you guys at 58 trying to either replicate that or grow past it. Sorry. There's only a few of those bands out there. Bad Religion's probably one of them. Is this where I'm supposed to say, but I digress? Fuck if I know. Let's get back to my notes about Behind the Music and some interesting stuff that Jane says. I like her quotes about how hard it is for her to be a solo act. There's no more band to take the brunt for you, right? There's no, when you get criticism, it's just you getting criticism. It's not spread out in some article that has to decide, okay, well, who do I complain about first? Do I get around to what Jane's doing? I also like a quote from her that probably came from someone else, because everyone has this quote in some form, whether it's from the business world or the art world or the music world. She says, I never learned a damn thing from success. I learned a million things from all my failures after the Go-Go's. Now, the Behind the Music also points out, in a way that the Showtime doc does not, that there were attempts to reunite that were very difficult. And in some cases being a very pointedly chosen word, litigious in nature. But like all Behind the Music reunions, VH1 wants to make it sound like their new stuff sounds like their best work. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, thanks to VH1's involvement. And also, there's a quote from Gina saying, the album God Bless the Go-Go's sounds more like what we sound like live. So good for them, I say. I think if they got together, wrote some songs, and had a good fucking time in the studio and had a good fucking time on tour, that's success. That's wonderful. Totally happy for them, because a million other bands couldn't pull that off. And I think everyone has the right to try for that. Everyone should be able to try to, I don't know, to how do I say it? Everyone should be afforded the opportunity to reconnect with their audience. And if it's genuine and if the audience responds positively, excellent. everyone goes home happy. Last note I had on the VH1 approach versus the Showtime approach. And by the way, the behind the music video tells you real shit about everyone's solo projects. There's a lot there. Wow. So I'll include a link to some bullshit rip of the behind the music on YouTube in the description as well. God knows if it'll still be up by the time you are listening to this, wherever you are and whenever you are. Hopefully you're in a retirement home sitting next to me, drooling, and just discovering this wonderful podcast episode for the first time. So let's go to summer of 84, and the Go-Go's have released a talk show. They are on tour. They are partying it up with In Excess from Australia. They were riding high, she says, on the single Original Sin off their newly released album, The Swing. All of us clicked immediately. We were kindred spirits. I don't know if that was a good thing, but it made for fun on and off stage. Pause there. I had to go look up the album The Swing and the single Original Sin because I was like, what? I mean, I know like as an American young person who didn't have MTV in the 80s, like most of what I know from In Excess was from the album Kick, which was like later in the 80s, like I think 88 or somewhere around there. And then the X album, which is the one that had Suicide Blonde. And I don't know much before that except for the song I'm coming else off the ground. Well, spell it down, spell it about. Don't change the doll. Change the thing for me, which is an earlier one. I don't know what album that's on. So I went on a big old tangent checking out this track, Original Sin. And it bears some discussion because the person I was in a band with that got me to to perform that In Excess song as a singer, Don't Change a Thing, was also a person who's obsessed with Nile Rodgers. Turns out Original Sin is produced by Nile Rodgers, and I listen to it and go, well, of course it is. Good Lord. Like, it's Nile Rodgers perfection. And if you don't know who he is, he's the reason you've heard of Madonna. Some of the things he has produced or co-written are like a Virgin, We Are Family by Sister Sledge, Get Lucky by Daft Punk, I'm Coming Out by Diana Ross, Let's Dance by David Bowie. I mean, the post-Berlin trilogy, Scary Monsters and Super Creeps era of Bowie is largely defined by Nile Rodgers' involvement and basically writing that song Let's Dance and helping to write other tracks on the Let's Dance album that, you know, he might not have, maybe he did or maybe he didn't get credit for writing all of them, but he was a big part of changing the chord structure and creating all these great harmonic movements in them. And you can look up videos about him talking about that song specifically and articles talking about what he did, you know, with David Bowie. But that whole Serious Moonlight tour era, you know, before basically, I don't know, I guess after Scary Monsters, before Tonight in 1984, that era of Bowie is defined by Nile Rodgers' involvement. And that was the involvement that brought Stevie Ray Vaughan, famous Texas blues guitarist, into that band and on tour. Who was, of course, so dissatisfied by what it was like to be a sideman for someone like David Bowie and the way that the big machine worked that he had to bail and for his own sanity. By the time he left, they hadn't even filmed a video for Let's Dance yet. So whenever you see the footage from the the music video for Let's Dance, there's these clear Stevie Ray Vaughan licks, that no way in hell does David Bowie have a chance of being able to physically play. But he's pretending to, he's holding a guitar and he's standing a long ways away in soft focus, holding a guitar neck. And David Bowie's a guitar player. He's a better guitar player, probably a lot of us, but he's no Stevie Ray Vaughan. So I thought that was an amazing little fact. I listened to the song, and it turns out that, I don't want to leave off the rest of a couple other tunes. He wrote the B-52's Rome, or was produced. He produced it. So that can mean anything. And then he was involved in Notorious by Duran Duran in '86, and someone named Sheila from France, a track called Spacer in 1980, which is a big deal if you know who that is. I don't, but it was on this list in an article I found, so there you go. I figure it's pertinent to anyone in France who's listening to this. Someday, maybe the French will catch on to my podcast. I don't know why they would, but, I can dream. So the song Original Sin was written by Michael Hutchence, singer, and other key songwriter for INXS, Andrew Ferris. They had started recording in Australia, but then went to work with Nile Rodgers at the Power Station Studios in New York City. If you want to know what songs that came out of Power Station sounded like, look up Some Like It Hot by the band Power Station, I think. I'm guessing that was recorded there. I'm not looking it up. I've already taken you on too long of a side quest, and I've got a point here. So the song was called Brand New Day originally, then it was retitled Original Sin and reworked with Nile Rodgers' production style and arrangement and his funky sounds. If you listen to Let's Dance, if you listen to Sister Sledge, if you listen to I'm Coming Up, and then hear this, you'll get it. It also features Daryl Hall, who came in to sing on the choruses of the song. Now, Hutchence had written, the lyrics one way. He said it was about kids and conditioning, growing up, how you grow up through other people's ideas or your own. But it was Nile Rodgers' idea to throw an interracial spin on it, because he was saying, instead of singing Dream On White Boy, Dream On White Girl, why not make it Black Boy, White Girl? I come from an interracial couple. Psychologically, that makes it a bigger statement. Which, when you watch it, and he's like riding around on a motorcycle in Japan, in Tokyo or something. It's a Japanese video director, and the band's all on motorcycles, and their mullets are flowing through the air, and they look as good as you can look at that time in the '80s as a person could probably look on MTV if you're into looking at the guys in INXS, and it seems quaint now in the year that I'm recording this and at the age that I'm recording this. I'm thinking, oh man, so many people, especially, my age and people much younger than me watching this would go, oh, come on. Like, what are you, this is not like Martin Luther King civil rights era struggle. Well, it turns out that the song was actually on a banned list, BANNED, like on a list of songs not to play on US radio stations. That's what I'm finding when I look up articles about it. I don't have the inside story. There isn't an entire book written about it, but it was sort of deemed like, nah, we're not doing this. Not in Reagan's America. Andrew Ferris said he knew they'd hit a nerve when someone tossed a pistol and a threatening note on stage at the Austin gig they played on the tour supporting it. Suddenly it became, hang on, we've pushed a social button, he said, and in a strange way, that set the tone for what we recorded later on. So from my goofy point of view, it's weird because I got MTV in the early 90s, and I saw this pro-equality, anti-racism messaging, and I just thought, yeah, that's how everything should be, right? We should all treat each other as equals and not judge folks by the way they look and stuff. And I didn't have any concept of what different races went through growing up in various parts of America, obviously. But it just seemed like, all right, we're fighting the good fight through music and marketing and advertising and good-looking models on MTV, I guess. But it's crazy to think that, oh, yeah, a few years before that, it was still like there was still resentment in America for even mentioning a white boy and a black girl in a song where there isn't even like romance described in the song. It's not like he took off her pants and he shoved his face in right between them cheeks like we all want to do. Nope. It just, the words white boy and black girl in there, I guess were offensive enough that like the people of Reagan's America, we're like, no. We're dialing it back. We're going to get back to Lyndon Johnson as fast as we can. That's the whole point of this. That's the whole point of these 2 terms in a row. We're going to erase the whole Carter years and we're going to go straight back to where we were. Yeah, this is an episode about the Go-Go's, I understand, but I'm processing things when I make this show, and you have to sit through me processing them. And I'm doing it all to get us back to the Belinda and Michael Hutchence angle, which I think this is the original thing that made me want to discuss this era of the Go-Go's, because she said she and Michael had a great old time. We were attracted to each other as soon as we met. He was a sexy, sensual man with great eyes that didn't suck you in as much as they made you want to jump in. That's pretty killer. He had all the goods to make him a great lead singer. Hot looks, an animal-like sexuality, a mysteriousness, and the ability to deliver to an arena full of people and touch the person in the back row. That's raw power, and it was packaged perfectly. Imagine trying to deal with that force of personality when he's right across the table from you. We talked backstage in his dressing room and in mine. We also sat on the stage and then shared tea at a table in the catering room backstage. He was full of conversation about any subject, yet when he listened, I felt like there was no one else in the world talking but me. I knew something was going to happen between us before there was any discussion or a move in that direction, and I warned myself in the strongest of terms that he wasn't the kind of person to get serious about. Once I was satisfied I could handle that, which was about 2 days into the tour, I gave in to Michael's charms, and we hooked up. We had fun, and I had to keep reminding myself not to let him get under my skin. He had a serious girlfriend, but he admitted that he also had many friends and preferred that arrangement. That was one more reminder that if I let him into my life, he would be the death of me. I didn't need to have any more messes in my life. We watched each other perform, partied after the shows, and eventually disappeared into one or the other's hotel room for the night. His charms were strong, and I quickly felt close to him. I felt like he understood me. He had that way about him, yet I constantly reminded myself to keep a distance and protect my heart. I was partying pretty hard at that time, harder even than Michael. And at one point, the girls in the band asked him to speak up to me after I lost my voice from doing too much coke. He wasn't the kind of guy who was going to save anyone, but he tried. He talked to me about the responsibility the singer had to the band, the record label, and the fans. He was extremely thoughtful and insightful about the special place we occupied in the imaginations of our fans. They fantasize about much more than is really there, don't you think? He asked. Very much, I said. And for a moment, I considered confiding how little I thought of myself and how frightened I was that people were going to find out that I was nothing more than an imposter. It would have been very easy to go there, but I feared it would have been letting Michael too far inside of me. Ultimately, I knew that revealing myself to him would only result in disappointment. As a result, I thanked him for sharing his concern, but kept on doing my thing, which disgusted my bandmates so much that at one point on the tour, they actually quit talking to me. It didn't last long, and neither did my summer fling with Michael. At the end of July, we said goodbye, and Michael and I had a sweet, romantic, and passionate last night together that was a little sad and something of a relief, and in retrospect, kind of interesting in that we promised to remain friends, which we did until his death. Let me read some quotes from the early Go-Go's days out of the We Got the Neutron Bomb book. It's all in oral history, so it's not like I can just, narrate in my own words. It's better just to hear the people's voices themselves, and there's plenty of things in this book that you could buy it for. I've already used this as a reference in my Blasters episodes and in my Joan Jett episode. So there's also tons of Black Flag. There's tons of the Germs, X, plenty of things to dig into, and it's not even that big of a book. So I'm saying all that because I'm absolving myself of any guilt from just reading straight from it onto an audio podcast, but I'm not advertising it as an audiobook, am I? So they start the Go-Go's chapter talking about stuff that, is covered in the Showtime documentary about them touring in the UK with ska bands. And then there's some... I want to read these quotes because it gives voice to people that are sort of sidelined in the history of the band because they were there early and got replaced. So Margot Oliveira talks about the Go-Go's diet imposed to fit a certain image. Yeah, the Go-Go's diet was we were on a stipend of $40 a week, which nobody can live on. And we would get a bonus if we lost 10 pounds or something like that. I don't remember if Ginger weighed us, Ginger, the manager that's like crying in both documentaries because they replaced her with, a big management company. Let's see. But it made borderline anorexics of all of us, including me. I remember Jane got really pimply because she was doing crystal meth to lose weight. I would throw steamed vegetables in a blender and call it soup. I had no money. Well, that is soup. That's what soup is. That's what vegetable soup is. There's vegetable broth and there's bits of vegetables in it. That's a good idea. It just doesn't. Soup is what you cook it in a pot like overnight or something, or you cook the broth out of the vegetables and then, you add other things maybe. But yeah, that's what soup is. It's just It's just faster soup. Faster soup. That's a band name. Somebody write that down. Get that on a t-shirt and wear it to the podcasts about the history of rock and roll and film and also rock and roll awards on the red carpet. Get your photo taken wearing that shirt. And I will put you on my Instagram. My Instagram is @justtheworstever, by the way. So she goes, I had no money anyway. The 25-cent box of macaroni and cheese was affordable but too fattening. Ginger says, when we came back from London, everybody had really put on the pounds, the British heavy starch diet. I'm sure it was devastating to their physiques. Jane Wylin says the whole LA scene had changed by the time we got back from England in early 1980. It had been taken over by all these angry young white boys, Black Flag. We were like, what's all this about? It's really gross. We were lumped in with all these stupid bands, but we never even knew those guys. What had started as a scene of girls and gays and stuff was nearly all gone, which is, how it's presented from their side of the story. There was a very inclusive, artsy, accepting gay, straight, man, woman kind of scene, and it got overrun. And, people like John Doe from X have talked about this too. They came first. They were a little more, artsy poetry stuff. And and nowadays he's like, me being all uptight and stuff. You're like, how dare these people make it impossible for me to wear a cardigan on stage with all their running around and, skinhead stuff and tattoos and no shirts. And it really happened because of the cops. There's the punk scene had to get militarized because of stuff like the, Elks Lodge massacre on St. Patrick's Day. That stuff was happening all the time. These are the cops that had run the hippies out of town and physically bludgeoned them into being subservient in the 60s, late 60s, And that's kind of why people like John Densmore and Ray Manzarek of The Doors were so taken with the punk scene in the late 70s, early 80s, because they really saw a sort of resurgence of the same kind of spirit. A very do-it-yourself, music for the sake of music, playing with your friends, kind of a scene that the cops were trying to destroy. And they, and Ray Manzarek's the guy that produced X's, at least their first album. I don't remember if he did more after that, but, he fostered their early career because he cared about that so much. So that's why they come home. I mean, they came home from getting spit on by punks and skins and rude boys and stuff in the UK. And then there's all this nasty violent shit going on with, white guys with skinheads and mohawks in LA. And Keith Morris of the Circle Jerks and Black Flag says the Go-Go's were playing pop music. They were never really a punk band to begin with. They were a female vocal harmony group with rock guitars and drums. Of course they're going to be taken aback playing a show where there's 95% sweaty guys jumping around and a little blood action flowing. To that, I would say that just a few weeks ago, someone I know from Seattle scene, who evidently, I don't know his real name because he doesn't use it on Facebook and he posts a lot of wacky shit, evidently was one of the founding members of The Accused, was at a Circle Jerks show because he was more interested in seeing the other bands playing with them and saying, because Keith Morris is a fucking sellout fake piece of shit. So whatever, if you want to talk about who's hardcore punk or not, it's all a sliding scale, man. It's all a spectrum. Anyways, Margot says she went to jail again. Someone asked me to buy them Coke, and Ginger, their manager, had a connection. We were at the Starwood, and Ginger told me to get a drink on her CBS Records tab, but the bartender wasn't buying it, and I'd already drank half of it, so I just walked away with it, and they called the cops. The same sheriffs who'd arrested me previously. I dumped what was left of the Coke into a bush, and they pulled out the Coke, and whatever was left blew away. They took me in. I was in jail overnight. Dan Bonbreak from X bailed me out. 2 lab reports came back, one for 2.5 grams. No way. It was totally bogus. So anyway, we hired a lawyer, and I got something like probation. First felony offense. Goddamn. But one of the stories when they fired me was, oh, you have a record, and we want to go to Japan, and you won't be able to come. Well, I mean, if that's true, then that's true. Sorry. I'm torn now. But the real reason was because I wasn't a pop songwriter. In the same way we'd heard about Gina, they'd heard about Kathy Valentine, and they wanted her in the band because she was a pop songwriter. Plus, I was a really wild punk rocker, and they wanted to be a girl pop band, and they knew I'd resist that transition, and in fact was already doing so. Okay, so you got yourself kicked out of the band for 2 reasons. Sorry, Jesus. 4 against 1, tough shit. Knock it off. Go do something else. Start your own band. So maybe it was a contradiction in themselves, what they were doing in punk to begin with. Ginger, Kenzaneri. Margot gradually was hanging out with different people and had different interests and maybe took different drugs. She became ill, type A hepatitis, and we all had to go to get shots. She was feeling run down, and I think that what happened was that the band was feeling kind of fed up with her. 3 reasons for kicking this person out of your band and replacing them. Margot says, another reason why they fired me, they said, was I got hepatitis. I was sick, the Go-Go's diet, I was living on celery soup, and then we go to a club and have an open tab because now we're the Go-Go's back from England with We Got the Beat in the charts, so everyone would give me free drinks, I'd get quite drunk. Basically, I fucked up my liver. I did a myriad of drugs. I wasn't a junkie, heaven forbid. It was part of that scene, part of everybody's life. It wasn't that. It was that, and it was an excuse. It was a real cop-out. All right. It's hard to process in print form. If someone was talking to you casually, you can kind of stare at them and nod your head and hear where they're going, but this isn't working for me. It wasn't that. If it was that and it was used as an excuse, it was a real cop-out. Okay. I think I read it better that time. That was pushed in my face because Charlotte had gone back in the closet as far as her drug taking. Later, when I moved to New York and was living in the East Village, I remember seeing her a couple of times walking east. So that's different than my takeaway from the documentary in this episode, or if I split this into 2 episodes than the previous one. where I mentioned like, oh, it's in LA and she sees Charlotte walking across town where she's squatting. Maybe she saw her going to get score drugs in LA and saw her going to score drugs in the East Village. Very, very likely both of those could have happened. Ginger says, we all had to get shots. I know it's contagious, and the feeling in the band was she was letting them down. We had 6 shows that were already sold out at the Whiskey. The attitude was, we better start looking around fast because this girl is not going to be in any physical condition to play. The strenuousness of the show is going to be too much. So they started auditioning bass players. Kathy Valentine filled in for those dates. I'm not quite sure, but the band made this decision. We think Kathy should replace Margot. I remember being told that because I was the manager. I had to tell Margot. And I found that really distasteful. It was upsetting for me and upsetting for Margot. I'm not good at doing those kind of things, and I don't really want to talk about it. Then don't be a band manager, Ginger. Terry Graham says, Margot was always a fun girl. She was great. Always laughing and smiling. She endeared herself to a lot of people. So when they kicked her out of the Go-Go's, it offended many. Many people in the community felt she had been brutally violated. Any naive ideology we might have had, that was the end of... Really? Was that the end of your naive ideology? Not cops beating the fuck out of people for no reason and maybe friends overdosing on heroin or anything like that? I don't know. All right, fine. The end of the innocence and the beginning of the end of the scene for me. Exene Cervenka says, Margot was devastated when she got kicked out of the Go-Go's. I felt very sad and angry about that. I had a band mentality. You just stood by each other. You didn't replace someone like Margot. She was my closest friend in the band. I don't know why they fired her. I heard rumors. I could never figure out why. Seemed to be no reason whatsoever. Sure. Ginger then says she was introduced to Miles Copeland and told him about the band, and he became interested after he started hearing things back about the band, I guess from other people. They signed a deal with IRS Records and went to New York to record Beauty and the Beat. Charlotte then says, we got an extremely tiny budget from Miles Copeland of IRS Records to do an album. We went to New York and stayed at the Wellington during the recording. Kathy Valentine says, I used to get FedEx packages of drugs sent to me. Belinda Carlisle says, we'd be at the kitchen table chopping that coke out and talking about what we were going to do that night. Charlotte says, it's amazing. We got the record done.
Oh, terrible. Fucking 89 Bobby McFerrin era pop music.
Shut your mouth. Shut up.
Stacy's right to tell me to shut up because Bobby McFerrin's a very nice man and he's very talented. I just hate that production sound that takes me back to bad memories of 5th grade.
Dude, she looks like wow.
Well said, Jay. Well said. Glad we got that in there. Now let us talk about Valley Girl. Valley Girl is a weird phenomenon in the history of me trying to make the history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll, because I decided early on that I was going to cover it, and I just didn't know what bands I was going to link it to. And then I thought, well, I think I should do more of an MTV kind of episode in general, like a history of MTV and girl bands like the Bangles and the Go-Go's, maybe. And then I put it off for a long time. I watched the film twice within like a year and a half, and it was for the first time. You know, I'd never seen it when I was young. It was for, you know, it was for the kind of people that were old enough to have babysat me when I was little, and it always seemed like it was for girls, and it is. But I struggled with what I was going to do with that for a long time. I kept a lot of notes. I looked into the making of the film and the story behind it, and then I just sort of got more prioritizing stuff like doing the Doors episodes, doing the AC/DC, doing the Misfits, stuff that I could speak to from more experience and passion before I got into analyzing other people's stuff that I had no connection to, which is why a lot of the things I wanted to do with early rock and roll have taken a long, long time, because I don't have any connection with the movies so much that I am covering when it comes to Little Richard, when it comes to Elvis. I've been working on the Little Richard one for a long, long time, just in little bits and pieces, because I don't want to screw it up. Like, these guys are super important, and I don't want to. I'm glad I didn't do it too soon. The Jerry Lee Lewis stuff was an eye opener on how I was going to just sort of figure out how to make this show happen, episode by episode. And after doing that, I put off a lot more of the early rock and roll stuff, because I'm like, this historical stuff is really, really important to me, and I don't want to rush into it. And I'm glad. So, point of all that is, the Valley Girl concept for this episode got left behind for over a year and a half. And I've now decided I'm just going to shoehorn it into this Go-Go's episode with satisfaction, because there's not a lot about Valley Girl that directly relates to stories I really want to tell, rock and roll wise, because the actual bands they use in it aren't terribly interesting to me. The ones that appear, they were part of a scene. They did their thing, and I don't think they lasted that long. They don't. I mean, it's a cool deep dive if you want to go on it, as far as who was filmed in that. There's like a band. There's a band in this club playing multiple times. They just look like, kind of like, I want to say, like the Jam, or they look like the Knack. One of those early '80s bands with like shag haircuts and dressed with collared shirts and stuff. They're kind of looking and playing like a '60s mod throwback almost, but not that stylish. I think one guy's got a Rickenbacker guitar, so he's definitely the Beatles guy in the band, or the Who guy in the band. There's a guy swinging his arms, doing the windmill like Pete Townsend from the Who. But this is supposed to be the punk show that the girls are kind of weirded out by. And they're all very presentable young men on stage singing perfectly reasonable poppy rock songs. I also at one time thought I was going to do a comparison with Valley Girl and Repo Man, because I love Repo Man. And while I don't, I found out I liked Valley Girl a lot more than I thought I would, I kind of see them as, two sides of a coin here, one being more cynical and fun and rugged and exciting, which is Repo Man, and one being a little friendlier and glossier, which is Valley Girl. Much in the way Casablanca is the optimistic view of what two lovers could go through during World War II, and one of my favorite movies of all time, The Third Man, is the more cynical version. And I know that's probably not a helpful reference for most listeners right now, but as you know, it's my show, and I can do what I want, and I need somewhere for all these stray thoughts of mine to end up. And now they've ended up in your ear. Speaking of body parts, the first thing about Valley Girl I noticed that was unnerving is Nicolas Cage's chest, specifically his chest hair. Turns out that someone on the production said he needed to shave his chest hair because he was too hairy for a 17-year-old boy, which is what he was portraying. But he was 17 years old, and that's just how much hair he had on his body. He is the son of Francis Ford Coppola, after all. And, by the way, changed his name to Nicolas Cage because Luke Cage, Hero for Hire from Marvel Comics, was one of his heroes. So Nicolas Cage, not wanting to show that he could be totally bossed around, but also not wanting to show that, act like he was undirectable, shaved most of his chest hair off except for a V-shaped sort of looking patch up top. And he did that because he thought it would be funny or cool to shave something that looked like roughly the shape of Superman's emblem on his chest. So it's that sort of V diamond shaped sort of a deal there. That's why he did that. And it is weird to look at. It is impossible to look at other things when he's shirtless in this movie. It's bizarre. Going by my notes from when I watched the movie initially, the moms are clearly cast barely older than some of the main characters' teenage friends. Like Brad, who she tries to strike up a conversation with at the party. And the main character's dad looks like Sonny Bono. Look that up if you have to. The early part of the movie establishes their generation gap. By contrast, Repo Man does it by establishing the main character's parents sitting in front of the TV all the time, watching a televangelist who they've spent their son's college money, or sent their son's college money to. In Valley Girl, they're upstanding citizens who are still very much in love and run a health food cafe of some kind. Anyway, the moms in this movie are super dreamy. I think that was during the sort of house party scene where, you know, parents are there, like, and they've made sushi for these teenage kids. Like, they all hang out together. They want to be the cool moms and dads that are still with it. I then wrote, the casting of the female squad is nice and sensible. They look close to the right age. They don't seem like a bunch of sophisticated model types or, you know, actress types that are ready for the cover of a magazine. This isn't Mean Girls, to use an outdated reference from a movie that had come 20 years later. Their delivery is energetic and it comes in a natural way, and they talk over each other like teenagers do. They look like, teenagers, good Lord. 30 to 50-year-old to 60-year-old men in a bar sharing a pitcher of beer talk over each other the way these gals do. But that was my thought at the time. It just seemed to be fairly representative of a teenage energy, natural. And what else did I write? Oh, they all look like they belong in the same clique. Not like they're 5 different archetypes put together to represent all of teen culture at once. We need Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3 for that. Apparently, I thought that was worth noting. Tangent, it says, low-budget movies in this era were overflowing with hunky-looking tall guys shoved into any main character role, whether they could read lines or hit their marks. Outlaw of Gore, and that's G-O-R, not G-O-R-E, and The Dungeon Master come to mind. Thanks to Mystery Science Theater and Red Letter Media, I now know what those are. They're all usually sporting the Empire-era Luke Skywalker haircut. Maybe the gals had enough opportunities in music videos or catalogs to get modeling work after they came out of Barbizon School of Modeling. So there weren't as many, super strikingly gorgeous women available for low-budget movies is what I guess I'm getting at there. I then note the shitty romantic social structure in the Valley. Men are domineering and girls are judgmental. By comparison, the club scene, hanging out with the 2 quote-unquote punk dudes, is like going from a heavy patriarchal repression into wild Dothraki culture or Klingon, where you have to fight for mates. But both guys are nicer than what the girls are used to. They're smarter in conversation, not manipulative or out to use them. And they aren't too cool to fight for the right to be with these girls. They represent danger, freedom, and possibility. The soundtrack is quirky and keyboard-driven, but not at all aggressive or anything resembling punk rock. And I keep saying this because Nicolas Cage and his buddy are supposed to be punks. They have like throwaway lines when he's like when they're driving in his convertible and he's like seeing his buddies, like, oh, hey, all these extras just like walking around looking like punk rockers. And they probably were a lot of actual punk rockers, unlike the cast. And he's like, oh, hey, you said you were going to get that mohawk. I knew you'd chicken out or something to that effect. It's just like, we're punk rockers, everybody. And then it says, I also wrote, it's incredibly middle of the road commercial dad rock of the time. My first guess was a young, not as talented Warren Zevon with a chorus pedal on his guitar, but it turns out to be Pat Travers singing I La 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 Love Ya. Super not punk to the max. And our 2 punk guys dress differently than the Valley fellas, but no spikes or jean jackets or leather. More low-key Flock of Seagulls roadie kind of a look, maybe. Like when they go downtown and somehow get into a club without being carded, they watch a very tepid Beatles meets Replacements looking group with Beatles meets Replacements looking guitars and a keyboard player clanking out bell sounds. And they have one guitarist that looks like he actually listened to the director telling him to act more punk. So he's energetically hopping around and doing windmill arm swing thing. At the very end of the film, there's a couple of songs by Josie Cotton. She and her band look very new wavy, but play a kind of sterile sounding version of hand clappy 60s beach party music to my ears. First gal to get laid in the film is played by Elizabeth E.G. Daly, who ended up putting out 2 records as a solo artist, getting 2 tracks on Scarface, building up a career as a voice actor, among other things, as the voice of Tommy Pickles in Rugrats, Babe from Pig in the City, and Buttercup in the Powerpuff Girls. She was also Dottie in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And then, for people like me, she'd be most recognized as a woman prostitute in Rob Zombie's Devil's Rejects and a murderous clown in the movie 31. Going back to my favorite teen 80s movie as a kid, she sang We're Gonna Conquer Our Obstacle and Win montage anthem in the movie Summer School. Mind over matter. If this series of mine, I don't know if I'm writing to myself or if I'm writing to the viewer or listener here. The viewer, Jesus. If this series of mine ever takes off and reaches a wide audience, I will use my influence to try and interview people like her whenever possible. Also, note Summer School connection has with Steel Panther. Oh, yeah, that's right. The guy that played Chainsaw in Summer School, if you remember that film, went on to be a director and directed, among other things, a few Steel Panther episodes. And he was also starring in, and I think directing, an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia from a couple years ago, where they go to an 80s ski resort movie plot, like in Better Off Dead and those other ski movies of the 80s. Overall, I was surprised at how much heart this movie has built into it. They don't make them like this anymore. They'd have to water it down for more mainstream appeal and Instagram models, or more like those manic pixie dream girl movies from the early 2000s. It's pretty fun as a time capsule piece. That was that was a surprise to me. I was surprised, number one, that it was more low budget and independent than I had expected, based on no evidence whatsoever, just my impressions of the legacy of Valley Girl being so important to so many young women that were a good 5 to 10 years older than me. And also that it was, it is, I don't know, it seems legitimately, earnestly a well-intentioned sort of teenage story. I found out a couple of things that were not surprising. There was tits in it just because the studio made them put tits in it. That wasn't part of the plan normally, but to keep up with, Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Porky's, which were really popular, they had to throw this in, they had to throw some boob shots in. Studio tried to get Robert Zemeckis to make Back to the Future a lot more raunchy as well, because of those two movies being so popular. And they said, no, we're not going to do that, thankfully. Now, what's the connection with the Go-Go's, you ask? No, you don't ask. You don't care, because you're not really that invested in my process, but I don't blame you. The point of me including it really was based on a misconception in my memory that there was a mall scene in Valley Girl that was set to the tune of We Got the Beat by the Go-Go's. In reality, that was the opening scene for Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Now, retroactively, not retroactively, later in the Valley Girl remake film, which I didn't know existed until 1 year ago exactly, there is a We Got the Beat inclusion, and there's a music video for a remake of We Got the Beat from the soundtrack where they're in the mall. The main female characters in the mall. The remake, to me, especially going back and revisiting it this morning through watching that We Got the Beat video, is kind of horrifying, and it's everything that the original is not. Not to say that that's bad or that it shouldn't have found an audience or doesn't deserve to have its own audience. It's just definitely nothing close to the spirit of the original. It's just a high school musical formula, basically. It's a musical. The cast are all young and vibrant and terrifyingly youthful and excited to be doing things around the mall with their friends. There's parts of this, especially in the music video, but in the musical sequences of the film, when it's upbeat stuff, like it's like a Crest commercial from the 80s that just goes on and on and on, and it should have stopped after 20 seconds. It's like these young people are all high on methamphetamines and MDMA at the same time. They're constantly bright-eyed and wide-eyed and smiling and just like getting so excited and, twirling around and like, oh my gosh, having reactions to everything has an extreme reaction in their body language, tilting your head back, rolling your eyes up, and putting your hands on your chest, kind of, one character in the shot, while the other is like flinging her arms out like she's so excited and, raising her eyebrows like she's in love because she's seen some outfit that she wants to buy. I mean, you could look it up. I'm not going to include a link to it. It's horrifying. The way that made me feel, like sometimes, I don't know, after hearing music that's like really saccharine or just generally pleasant, middle of the road music for nice people to listen to, I have to go off by myself and listen to Slayer's God Hates Us All album to recalibrate my own personal chemistry. But it's not true. That album's not good enough to listen to all the way through anymore these days. When it first came out, yes. I listened to 5 songs on that album, and then I'm done. Still the last good Slayer album as far as I'm concerned. This movie, like, thankfully, when I saw it at a friend's house because his wife loved it, because she loves the High School Musical franchise, thankfully we followed it up with like 2 Friday the 13th movies right after it, so I could recalibrate and cleanse my palate. I mean, both of us could. We were, we're doing the nice thing. We're watching something that the lady wanted to watch before she went to bed, and then we had free reign of the TV. But it is very much it's just a bunch of teenagers running around, I don't know, doing a teenage movie thing. It's not bad. It's not poorly executed, that's for sure. It's a lot of work, all that choreography, I get it, making a musical. It's the same basic Romeo and Juliet story. He's from the wrong side of town, and she's from, the upper crust kind of a thing. I don't care. That's not actually how the Romeo and Juliet story worked out. Whatever. You know what I mean? Overall, I'm glad movies like this exist. I'm happy for all the children on all the playgrounds not currently getting abducted or molested by the adult men staying home watching movies like these. With all these super hyperactive, young, fresh-faced kids, young teens, bouncing around, and I don't know, all the close-ups on their eyes and their mouths and their smiles, and I can't deal with it. But because of that, there are children that get to live one more day above ground, and for that, I thank the producers of this Valley Girl remake and the High School Musical franchise, among others. If it's not painfully obvious, I don't like kids in my movies unless they're being murdered by an evil clown that lives in the sewer. Okay, I take it back. I loved every season of Stranger Things, so that's probably not entirely true.
Please tell me, so I wasn't recording earlier. What was the phrase? The muff bucket? Muff phase? Fuzz phase?
Oh, you fuzz mouth bitches.
You fuzz mouth bitches.
You fuzz mouth bitches.
God damn it. Ah, that's cute.
Hey, we got a tour in this van.
Also, Dirty Dancing era.
Yeah.
Fucking late 80s, early 60s. Doo-woppy songs.
Oh, I'm charming, aren't I?
They're still fucking banging in the fucking van now.
I'm making Dice Clay references because it's relevant to the late
Here
80s.
it comes all over your fucking face.
And it's going over very well with Murdoch.
She can't get enough.
He's also a scumbag like me.
Hickory dickory dock.
I just ran out of things that I knew Andrew Dice Clay would have said at that point. And my Dirty Dancing comment earlier that's totally without context is just the fact that the late 80s had a lot of that love for early 60s, almost doo-woppy style love songs as repopularized in the 80s by the Dirty Dancing soundtrack.
So just because he had sex with Debbie Harry all the time, Justine Bateman can't handle it.
Talking about getting married is a very natural thing. So is dying, but most people fight like hell to keep it from happening.
Yes! Love you, Britta. Love you, Britta. Britta's the only natural actor in this fucking movie.
So if you missed it, the quote from Julia Roberts' character was, "Getting married is a very natural thing." And then Britta Phillips' character responds with, "So is dying, but most people fight like hell to keep it from happening." Now let's go back to Valley Girl facts for a little bit, starting with the Frank Zappa connection. Great googly moogly. Now, as far as the original Valley Girl movie, again, some things I learned about it. it is named after the Frank Zappa and Moon Unit Zappa song, but he didn't want it associated with the movie. A year before Valley Girl got released, Frank Zappa and his daughter Moon Unit did have a hit with Valley Girl, and I don't want... and some quotes from him are, I don't want people to act like that. I think Valley Girls are disgusting. People think the Valley Girl is a happy kind of song, but it isn't. I've always hated the San Fernando Valley. It's a most depressing place. He also had been open to the possibility of collaborating on a movie that featured some connection to his song. He said as long as it wouldn't be like Beach Blanket Bingo. But Zappa did try to get a judge to halt production because of the film because it infringed on his song's copyright. He filed a suit for $100,000 in punitive damages. Another note, because it's fresh on my mind, if you are a fan of Frank Zappa, don't shy away from the documentary Eat That Question, Frank Zappa in his own words, if you think that it's not going to have enough musical content for you. I've been watching it this week, and it turns out it actually has a lot of concert footage interspersed with the interview footage. Highly recommend. Some other facts about Valley Girl. Turns out Martha Coolidge, who made $5,000 for directing the film. I don't know if there's more to it than that, but as far as getting, points or stuff on the back end or getting a piece of the, sales of physical media that came around later, hopefully she had someone negotiate that for her later. She actually turned down a bunch of the Brat Pack actors that were getting famous at the time and went for Nicolas Cage, not even knowing he was actually a Coppola, son of Francis Ford Coppola. Liked his energy, he had a little weird unpredictability in his eyes that she dug. She actually fought to make the cast more diverse than you see in the movie. She tried getting one black person cast in the main group of girls and was shot down by the studio. Just a reminder that studios make films look the way they look for a reason, because they are racist people. If it seems like that was happening for a long time, it was. It's interesting to me how in the 80s, if you watch local television and from places like Chicago, Illinois, or whatever, like the morning chat show host, there's more diversity that represents the actual community that something's being filmed in. But then later on that day, on that ABC affiliate or NBC affiliate or whatever it is, it's totally whitewashed. It's very strange that that this couldn't be addressed until we had like 175 streaming services and different studios to release. Anyways, getting off track, but still, I keep encountering this kind of stuff, prejudice, when it goes back to the rules of the entertainment industry in previous decades, not that long ago. Speaking of rules and entertainment, the Valley Girl soundtrack was supposed to be a lot more star-studded than it actually ended up being. They had $250,000 of budget to go towards clearing music rights. Originally, they had a Clash song in an early print. That got switched to a Men at Work song, and then the studio refused to redo the print to bring the credits up to date. Coolidge says they didn't care if the credits were correct. They just didn't want to spend that large amount of money. So CBS pulled the soundtrack album at the last minute. The film was released with the new songs in it, and some of the music credits were completely wrong. And something I never would have guessed, there was a mini soundtrack album released, but the full soundtrack didn't actually come out to the public for consumption until Rhino Records got it done in 1994. So there's also this band playing in scenes at a location in the movie called Club Central. They are the Plimsolls, who had contributed a song called A Million Miles Away. But Coolidge would reveal at a Q&A screening with Kevin Smith in the earlier 2000s, around 2011, I think, that she originally had gotten the band X to be in that scene. And they were in talks about this. It was very serious, she says. And then all of a sudden they kind of freaked out and they said, you know what? We don't want to alienate our Valley fans. And then they passed on the whole thing. Another exciting fact that for something that always bugged me and weirded me out, the poster for Valley Girl has Nicolas Cage, but not his co-star. It's not Deborah Foreman, who plays the lead, character in the film. It's just some hired on the day photo shoot model. Evidently, Deborah actually wanted to get paid for the work and the expense of going down to a shoot and, I don't know, contributing to the poster to advertise the film. And they were not going to pay her. So they just got somebody else. For free? I don't know. Probably paid her something for the day. But there was nothing that the director could do. So even now, all these years later, there's some just anonymous blonde with curly hair that looks nothing like your protagonist in the film on the box for the film. Oh, and I should mention that the club that they go to see the punkity rockety band that is not punkity rockety is actually what would become the Viper Room years later, owned by Johnny Depp, and where River Phoenix would meet his unfortunate end because of a drug overdose. If you would like to read about the events of that night in someone else's account, you can check out Al Jorgensen's autobiography from Ministry and Scott Ian from Anthrax's autobiography. They were both there that night. And I don't want to misquote him, Al Jorgensen or anything, but I believe Al was playing on stage at the Viper Room that night, on and off with a band that consisted of like himself, Gibby Haynes from the Butthole Surfers, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Johnny Depp, among one or two other sort of guest stars that would kind of come up and hop on stage for a little bit. Might not be exactly right about all those players, but that's what everybody was there to see, including River Phoenix that night. Now, the beginning of the film, all the scenes in the mall, that is not the Sherman Oaks Galleria, as many people, I guess, mistakenly thought. It was filmed at the Del Amo Fashion Show Mall in Torrance, California. And this was confirmed by Heidi Holliker herself. No shots were filmed at the Galleria. Heidi played the part of Stacy. She said it was really easy for her to do the Valley Girl thing because that's who she was as a teenager. E.G. Daly, on the other hand, said that was one of the most difficult parts of the shoot for her was developing the Valley Girl accent. And Deborah Foreman, who plays Julie, says she was helped out immensely by Moon Judith Zappa's voice on the hit song she heard on the radio. Also in the beginning scenes at the mall, there's the store they're shopping at is called Wet Seal, which was around for a long time after that. Probably still is somewhere. And apparently you can see the Bank of America card of Wayne Crawford, one of the co-writers of Valley Girl, being used in the Wet Seal card swiper. Wayne and his writing partner, Andrew Lane, supposedly wrote this script in 10 days, and it was shot in 22 days, costing $350,000 initially, but grossing over $17 million. Another special note that I just found, someone who says, sort of, this is an anonymous online person contributing this little nugget here, says she saw a screening of Valley Girl with live commentary from the cast and some crew. Deborah Foreman showed up and explained about the girl that Nick Cage makes out with in the club when Julie has dumped him was actually the Valley Girl poster model, which, as we've noticed, is not Deborah Foreman. Although Deborah chose not to elaborate any further than that. Heidi Holliker also notes that the outside of the club you see them go into is not the same location as the inside of the club. So if anyone's like, that's not the Viper Room, that's true. It's not. The door to go in is a different building entirely. And they all used a majority of their own clothing for the shoots because there was no budget for wardrobe for the for these young stars. Also, Nicolas Cage kind of adorably got into character and got a little bit meta, is it? Or method, is it? By writing love letters to his co-star, though they were not romantically entangled in any way in real life. I checked out the track listing for the mini LP from Roadshow Records, 1983. It's Girls Like Me by Bonnie Hayes, Angst in My Pants by Sparks, who you may have seen a recent documentary about. I haven't watched it yet. I'm kind of interested to check it out. School Is In by Josie Cotton and Johnny Are You Queer by Josie Cotton. Shelley's Boyfriend by Bonnie Hayes and the Wild Combo. And then Everywhere All at Once by the Plimsolls. The UK version, that came out in 84 on Avatar Communications actually has the modern English song Melt With You, as well as Love My Way by the Psychedelic Furs and Who Can It Be Now by Men at Work. Let's see. The other one I don't recognize, but it's She Talks to Me in Stereo by Gary Myrick. Now, the full soundtrack from 1994 on Rhino Records has 2 discs. There's, well, if you I guess if you buy them both, I take it back. It's not 2 discs. It's 2 separate discs that put together, like they're, first one's 15 tracks, second one's 16 tracks. You can look it up yourself if you want to know who's all on it. It would be boring and nightmarish for me to read them all one by one right now. But you get your Bananarama, your Thompson Twins, your Culture Club, your The Jam, etc., etc. But most importantly, the fundamental interconnectedness of all things here, folks. There is a song on the more music from the soundtrack of Valley Girl disc by Sparks and Jane Weedland from the Go-Go's. It's called Cool Places.
What Bulgaria? Bulgaria's not in Europe. Of course it is, stupid. Your ass.
Your ass.
Bulgaria's definitely in Europe.
How can she be right? How can freaking Bulgaria be in Europe? You're just agreeing with her to go against me.
No, I'm not.
I just happen to be right, Billy. We haven't been right in years. Oh, right. And have you ever been to Driving Fest? I think not, okay? I've been there every day. I read maps. I know what a globe is.
That's the turnaround. I love it. I love it.
Pillow fight, pillow fight, pillow fight.
No. That's the same thing that happens in the fucking Tiny Dancer scene in Almost Famous. The big turnaround, the band comes back together. Oh, there's a lot of fucking Goombas hanging around this movie.
There's an episode of the Dana Gould Hour podcast that I heard about a year and a half, I think, ago when it was new, that featured excerpts from an interview with Charlotte from the Go-Go's, and she talked about the Rock in Rio experience. It seems like Belinda has even more information on that experience in her book. So I think I'll use that for the sort of source of the details here. But I still want to put a link into the Music for Weirdos episode of the Dana Gould Hour, especially because Dana Gould Hour is probably one of the biggest influences on me doing this show. Now, they have they're in Brazil, and it's January 1985. It's a 10-day event, Rock in Rio, including Queen, AC/DC, Ozzy Osbourne, Rod Stewart, the B-52s, Iron Maiden, Yes, the Scorpions, and more than a dozen other acts. The gals check in the hotel. Then they, immediately see that the pool is like full of rock stars and groupies. She has been told, as all the girls have been told, to not venture away from the hotel for any reason. But she's heard that cocaine was only $5 a gram compared to $100 a gram in LA. Now that's important. This is going to influence what happens and why. So she gets in a taxi and tells the taxi driver she's trying to, she wants to buy cocaine. Driver takes her into the slums, and it takes a long time driving around. She gets worried she's going to miss Rod Stewart's dinner party that all the girls have been invited to. All the Go-Go's are invited to Rod Stewart's little dinner party. And she gets worried and says, go back to the hotel. So comes back to the hotel, nothing to show for it. And she's introduced to, various guests, members of Rod's band and music industry folks. And she starts talking with the daughter of a prominent local politician. And Belinda talks about how she had just gotten back from a little taxi ride around the city. And this young woman was like amused for about a second or two until she hears the description of the city as Belinda relates it and realizes she'd been in the slums and asked where Belinda had been going. Belinda pauses to consider what she should say exactly. And this young woman gives her a funny look, leans close into her, and tells her she's tight with some local major dealers. Then she escorts her downstairs, puts her in a cab, and says something very specific to the driver. Belinda assumes maybe it was the address, and off they go. Belinda, still alone, at the age of what, 25? I don't know. Because she doesn't want to tell the band what she's doing, or she doesn't want to share. I mean, she's going to share, but they're keeping their own counsel, I think, at this point, as far as who's doing what in the band recreationally. So the driver stops off in front of some, modern looking condo near Ipanema Beach and says he's going to wait for her while she goes inside. She's got no idea what to do, but, she hopes he's going to wait for her. And she goes up to the penthouse. She knocks on a door. And then she waits. There's no answer. She knocks on the door again. Then the door opens a little bit. And there's a dark-haired man looking at her. Not a friendly-looking man. But she mentions the name of the girl she met at the party and says that this politician's daughter said it was okay for her, Belinda, to come over. Before she could finish explaining anymore, he opens the door and she walks in. She assumes he already knows why, and turns out, yeah, he does. She looks around and sees there's only one reason anyone would want to go there. There's coke all over the place. It's stacked in bricks. And there were several tables where guys are sitting around in front of scales, dividing piles of coke into smaller amounts. She said she couldn't tell who was in charge and didn't want to look around because she immediately saw a couple of guys holding guns and knew better than to see more than she had to. In fact, she has a very strong feeling that she shouldn't have ever gone there in the first place and would have excused herself and left if a guy hadn't stepped forward and in broken English asked her what she wanted. What I wanted, she says, was to not get shot, but I didn't say that. Actually, I didn't say anything. I was too scared. How much do you want? The guy asked again. A gram, I said. He glared at me with disdain and disbelief. We don't sell grams, he said. I don't know any Portuguese accents except for the guys in Sepultura, so actually, we don't sell grams. I decided it was best not to explain that I had heard you could get grams for $5. Like, they're not fucking around, Melinda. They're not going to do this to make $5. And that's why I was here. I thought about how much I should buy. I didn't feel like asking what the minimum amount was that they could sell. Apparently, he didn't feel like waiting for me to figure out something to say. He asked if I wanted an ounce. I said okay, and paid whatever he said it cost, which wasn't much given the amount that I was taking away with me. I wanted to hug the cab driver for waiting when I saw his car still out front. I was thrilled we pulled in front of the hotel and gave the driver a generous tip. I stood in the lobby for a moment and took several deep breaths. If only Morgan knew, I thought. Thank God he didn't. And that's her very nice boyfriend at the time, whose family is like firmly ensconced in like old Hollywood like her. She was talking earlier in the book about her mother gasped when she told her who she was dating because he's the son of, Hollywood folks that she herself as a young person stood in line to wait to see at a big Hollywood event where they were premiering one of their movies, whoever it was. So she goes up to the room, takes all the coke out of her purse, and saw more coke than she'd ever seen. She says, I set it on the coffee table. It was like a little white mountain. I couldn't believe it. I did several lines and thought it was the purest, smoothest coke I'd ever put up my nose. Seconds later, I felt a strong, familiar jolt that erased the scare of men with guns and put me in a better frame of mind. I packed up the coke, put it in a dresser drawer, and went back up to Rod Stewart's soiree, which went on for a little while longer. Then I brought the girls back to my room, where we put on some music and continued the party. So they're out on the balcony, listening to music, smoking cigarettes, drinking, doing more coke, waving at people down in the pool, waving over at Rod Stewart and his people on their balcony and say, come on over. And Rod's like, no, you come over here. So they did. And they stayed up all night in his room. The sun's coming up and Rod realizes he hadn't slept and he had a show coming up that night. He said he never stayed up all night, never, which Belinda finds hard to believe considering his reputation. But that's what he said as he cleared everyone out of his penthouse, explaining like an old fuss budget that he still wanted to try and catch a few hours of shut-eye. We took the party down to the pool, where we ordered cocktails and smoked cigarettes. We weren't the only rockers who stayed up all night. The place was buzzing and buzzed, even as the morning sun bathed the hotel in new light. We saw people open their drapes, others head off to the gym, and every so often we looked up toward Rod's penthouse and saw him pacing back and forth on his balcony. I can't sleep, he yelled down at me. I couldn't tell if he was really upset or playing up his annoyance. He seemed upset. I have a show, he continued. I need my rest. What am I going to do? That night, the 13th, we played the first of our two shows. We went on after Nina Hagen and before Rod. Thanks to the live TV broadcast, we played in front of an audience estimated at 90 million. Afterward, we were sweaty and spent and intending to go back to the hotel and clean up. That is until Rod sent for me, along with Kathy, and insisted we sit on the side of the stage as he performed. He wanted to, he said, be able to look over at me and see that I felt as tired and miserable as him. I said it would be my pleasure, and it was. I wasn't so jaded that I didn't appreciate that I was having this time with a guy whose music I had sung when I was growing up. In the meantime, Charlotte was partying so hard that she got kicked out of Ozzy Osbourne's dressing room. It was a story that became legendary among rockers, and years later, Charlotte, who got sober, famously remarked, how bad do you have to be to get kicked out of Ozzy Osbourne's dressing room? Personal problems aside, Belinda says, we had another problem that was bigger than all of us. The Go-Go's just wasn't fun anymore. I had felt it when we had rehearsed in November and December for the Rock in Rio show, and knew it when we finally went on stage that first night. I didn't feel any more spirit either on the 18th when we played our second show, which found us between two incredibly enthusiastic, inspired bands, the B-52s, whose set included Tina Weymouth and Chris France from the Talking Heads, and the closing act, Queen, who, with Freddie Mercury out front, dazzled the worldwide audience. By comparison, I felt like the Go-Go's played without a heartbeat. One thing about rock and roll, you can have the best songs in the world, but if you don't bring passion to the stage, you might as well not show up. We came to that realization. It just took a little time.
I like how they're playing through a Fender Twin. Doesn't make any sense.
Why does it not make any sense, sir? Tell me, drummer, why does that not make sense?
It's not rock and roll, man.
It is! It's the loudest fuck amplifier for the time.
But it's clean loud.
But you put a fucking Boss Distortion pedal in front of it. It's just like Judas Priest, boy.
The classic Boss Overdrive.
Boss Overdrive and a turbo distortion.
This in 1988.
Also, they're playing clubs on the beach. Come on. They're not Anvil. They're not gonna be like, you know. The bad boys are here. And Justine is making a run for it. Dude, it's like a guy, he looks like one of the extras from Fame is coming after them. Good Foley work, nice. Also, interesting that there's no security in this fucking bar.
Is it good Foley work, Jay? Is it good Foley work? Let us keep listening and find out.
When your keyboard player has to fucking run interference.
You're in bad shape in a violent situation is my implication there.
Roadhouse.
That's an interesting Foley work. Interesting Foley work there.
See, if you say it twice, people understand you better. And you sound smarter to everybody. All right, enough of that silliness. Let's go back to Belinda for a bit. Now, in the events leading up to the recording of the Talk Show album, Belinda's drug use is worse than it's ever been, and she has resolved herself to try to moderate on her own instead of getting treatment. That doesn't work. They get a gig playing direct support, I think, for David Bowie at the Anaheim Stadium, but they have to have someone fill in for Charlotte because she's dealing with some carpal tunnel syndrome, which is an affliction in your wrists that a lot of people get when they play guitar for a long time with kind of bad technique or don't sort of physically take good care of themselves before and after playing. Don't do any stretches or any, healthy things that you're supposed to do. The kind of things that, athletes know to do all the time as a matter of general maintenance. But you don't get coaches in rock and roll making you ice things and, wrap things up when it comes to your limbs and your joints and stuff like you should. But Belinda is so isolated in her own behavior and in her own head. Even though she's obsessed with David Bowie, she doesn't want to be seen anywhere near him. She doesn't want to watch him from the side of the stage like she'd always would have liked to if she had the chance. She won't even socialize with the guys in Madness, their old friends from their, first big English tour, who are the opening band on the bill. When it comes to the recording of Talk Show, there is a producer brought in named Martin Rushent, who had worked with Spandau Ballet, the Human League, and Pete Shelley from the Buzzcocks, and he was hired to bring in fresh new influences. But his method of working didn't really relate to the Go-Go's very well. He isolated them all and tracked them individually and separately, which means the girls had plenty of time to be, off on their own when they weren't recording their individual parts, so they could get into all kinds of trouble. Belinda says, Charlotte vanished for a week. None of us had a clue where she had gone. We were extremely concerned till she popped up again. Not much worse for the wear. Gina was constantly fatigued or sick and going through her own struggles. Then in the middle of making the album, Jane decided she wanted to sing some of the songs, and she kind of flipped out when she was told no. And this is a big issue brought up in both the Showtime documentary and the Behind the Music. Belinda says, as I knew, the word no was a hard thing for any of us to hear. We were not told no that often. Certainly not as much as we should have been. I understood Jane's problem. She was cute, full of personality, and she wrote some of our best songs. She had an ego like anyone else, yet she stood off to the side, and it bugged the crap out of her, until finally she blew. Jane resented me for getting all the attention. She'd had moments like this before. Sometimes it was about boys. And sometimes, like this time, it was about the spotlight. I didn't think it was true, and in fact, I knew reviewers paid as much, if not more attention to the songs as to me. Unfortunately for her, the band was built around one lead singer. Around that singer's look and sound. That job belonged to me. I suppose we could have talked it out. But that wasn't the way I handled problems. My way was to ignore them, to pretend they didn't exist. If I didn't confront Jane, she wouldn't confront me about any of my problems. And that's pretty much the way the Go-Go's function in general. No one busted anyone. And that's why, maybe, despite all the crap and chaos going on in the band, the five of us still hung out together. But that was about to change. One day, Jane just couldn't take it anymore. She smashed the mirror in her hotel room and flew back to the States. When she returned, she had decided to leave the band and pursue a solo career, though she kept that news from us for a few more months. When it comes to the releasing of the album, it sounds like IRS is not putting out any advance, promotion from what she's saying here. She says, by February, we were back in Los Angeles with an album that, despite all the personal ups and downs we went through while making it, generated a buoyant optimism at the record company. As we rehearsed for the new tour, we got behind it too. On March 15th, Head Over Heels was released as the first single, and the next day, IRS put out the entire LP. There was no chumming the water. This album was going to live or die on our shoulders. It didn't look promising. The Los Angeles Times review a few days after the album's release called it awkward, noted the absence of catchy pop hooks, and said, the songs demand more work from the listener, and the elaborate melodies certainly demand more of singer Belinda Carlisle. Unfortunately, I agreed. Deep down, I knew that I had bitten off more than I could chew on that album. Unlike the other girls, I hadn't worked on my craft as hard as I should have. I would develop into a decent singer later, but at that time, I didn't improve as much as I would expect myself to if I was able to go back and do it over again. I find that to be a very humble, refreshing bit of self-awareness from a famous singer who went on to have a solo career and get famouser than she already was at that time. Good for her. And I should also say that I read this part now at the end of the episode out of order because those pages from her book actually come before the In Excess story and the Rock and Rio story. I just think it was a nice sort of wrap up of their attitudes and their lack of coping mechanisms and their lack of way of having that sort of ability to pull the brakes on things before the band was about to fall apart. It's not the end of the band's story. Obviously, I've talked through the documentaries, both of them, to the later parts of the band's history than where we're leaving off now. But I think her little summary of their attitudes and their working mentality together puts everything in perspective for the Go-Go's, and it's very much rooted in how they grew up when they were young and what their family dynamics were like. Like a lot of young women, they were taught not to speak up for themselves, not to be too loud, not to be entertaining or attention-grabbing. But they managed to fight through all that and become who they were, big, big stars, and then sabotage it, and then get it back together a few times with various legal wranglings. Good for them.
I was so poor at the time, it didn't matter. I was in a cinder block apartment in Tempe, Arizona at a luthier school. I'm like, all right, I'm going back to, we're going to work with bandsaws tomorrow. I think we're all good. Yeah. Drum sanders and
oscillating spindle sanders.
I haven't had one of those up my ass in a long time.
You really have to start living again, man. It's one life.
Well, Justine Bateman brought that all back to me. That's the main thing.
Justine Bateman, let's do it.
Cool.
As I've said in previous episodes, I thank you for being here. I thank you for giving a damn about how movies are made. I thank you for giving a damn about rock and roll. And a friendly reminder that this is brought to you with no ads at this time that I know of, and no patrons or any other funding like that. So if you can support, if you would like to, check the description of this episode or any other episode and check out the link tree. You could buy a weird shirt that has nothing to do with the podcast. You could actually just send me money, or you could follow me on Instagram or the Twitters. Or even better, just tell a friend about it. Send a link to someone you think might enjoy a show like this if you check out the other episodes. And maybe pick out a nice one for them that would make their day. Of course, I got to say thanks to Stace, thanks to William, thanks to Murdoch. If you want to check out their stuff, you can look up a band called Death by Overkill around here in Seattle, a band called the Adarna, and a band called Furniture Girls. If anyone listening knows Justine Bateman or Britta Phillips or E.G. Daily and feels like they're in a sufficiently bad enough place in their life to make bad decisions, with their money especially, please let them know that I think they're fantastic and would love to move in with them. Failing that, if any of you know anyone that took part in some of the movies that I've talked about, mentioned, covered, any bands that have good stories that I should be talking about in connection with movies, please let me know. Please send them my way. It's justtheworstever@gmail.com. Just the Worst Ever on Instagram as well, @RockFilmRock on Twitter. Oh, what's that, Stace? You want the last word on the movie?
This movie was everything to me back in the day.
Thank you again for being here. Rock and roll is the best, and so are you. It's people like us that keep each other sane and happy in a world where you just can't talk to other people about this kind of stuff. So remember, you deserve to be happy and you deserve to be able to have nice conversations with fun people about this kind of stuff. But you got to make it happen and you got to maintain it. Find those good people and hang on to them tight. Lots of love. Bye-bye.